His hand moved from my chin to the back of my neck. His rough fingertips pressed against the brand. In that instant, it was as if a bolt of lightning had struck my spine from that brand, scattering through every fiber of my being. I let out a short, sharp scream, not from pain, but from a sensation more complex than pain, a simultaneous explosion of heat and cold, something sealed away beneath my skin awakening. He tore open the cuff of his shirt. The sound of fabric tearing echoed through the hall. Something was emerging on the skin of his exposed forearm, seeping from beneath the surface, starting as a faint red, then growing deeper and clearer, as if being traced bit by an invisible hand. A crescent moon. Rose vines wound around the crescent, winding their way until they finally bloomed into a full, open rose at the tip of the moon. The pattern was glowing. The silver moonlight and the deep red rose intertwined, enveloping everything around them in an eerie halo of silver and crimson. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Someone dropped a wine glass. The crisp sound of shattering glass rang out. Someone was shouting something, words like prophecy and true destiny, scattering like pieces of paper, blown by the wind, fluttering through the hall. I couldn't understand, or more accurately, my brain had stopped processing language. I knelt on the ground, the back of my neck burning, my whole body trembling, watching the Wolf King, who held the power over my life and death, reveal an expression even more unhinged than when he killed. He stared at the mark on his arm, then at me. Fire burned in his dark golden eyes, and his thick black lashes trembled slightly. 300 years, his voice squeezed through clenched teeth, so hoarse it was barely audible, hiding among the servants, and it had to be you. He yanked me up, violently. My feet left the ground, and my whole body was hoisted before him like a rag doll. We were face to face, so close I could count every golden thread in his irises. His breath hit my face, scorching hot. The rumbling in his chest traveled through our pressed-together bodies, reverberating into my bones. His lips moved, one word at a time, as if uttering a curse or a salvation. You are my destined one. 7 words. 7 words crashed down, and the hall erupted into chaos. Screams, shouts, gasps, and the clatter of footsteps all mingled in a frenzied jumble. Leonora, the silver-haired woman standing by the throne, drained of all color in an instant. Her lips trembled, and her fingers dug into the palms of her hands. And me. He held me in his grip. The brand on the back of my neck felt like a red-hot coal, and tears mixed with sweat dripped onto his fingers. The stained glass dome sliced the moonlight into countless shards that rained down, red, silver, and blue falling on his shoulders, on my face, and onto the deep crimson stain, left by the shattered bottle of Blood Moon vintage. In that moment, there was only one thought in my mind. Not, he loves me. Not, I'm saved. Not any romantic fantasy. It was a more primal, more animalistic fear, because when an alpha wolf king utters the 4 words, true mate, that is not the beginning of a confession of love. In the world of the Wolf Clan, those 4 words are followed by power struggles, assassinations, clan purges, and power wars that run red with blood. And I, a human servant, who didn't even have a name, had now been thrust right into the center of this war. This is the trap of fate. It never gives you a choice. It simply kicks the door open, shoves you inside, and laughs from outside. And the door behind me had already clicked shut, locked tight. He dragged me across the entire ballroom. It wasn't walking, it was dragging. His 5 fingers clamped around my wrist with such force it felt as if they were digging into my bone. My feet barely touched the ground as I was stumbled along through the human wall formed by the nobles who automatically parted for us. My shoes skidded across the smooth marble floor, and my knee struck something, perhaps the armrest of some noblewoman's chair, sending a sharp pain shooting through me. Though I couldn't even manage a full cry of pain, I was surrounded by eyes. Hundreds of wolf clan eyes. Pupils that glowed in the darkness were all fixed on me. Some gasped, some whispered, and some covered their mouths. I heard fragmented sentences drifting through the gaps in the crowd. The chosen one, that human, the prophecy from 300 years ago. And there was a presence emanating from somewhere behind me, cold, sharp, like a blade frozen solid in winter. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Leonora, a pure-blooded silver wolf, the future queen everyone accepted as a given. I felt her gaze on the back of my head, that sensation of being targeted. Not a metaphor, but something I could actually feel, like 2 ice needles pressing against the most vulnerable spot on my skull. But I didn't have a chance to think about it further. Carrion pushed open a door, ebony edged in silver, with a wolf's head carved into the door, its jaws gaping wide. The door slammed shut behind him, cutting off all the noise from the banquet hall. We entered a corridor, lined with candelabras every few paces. The flames flickered violently as he passed, casting twisted shadows across the stone walls. At the end of the corridor was another door. He kicked it open. Wood shavings flew. The heavy oak door slammed against the wall like cardboard, its hinges screeching shrilly. I was dragged inside, then released. No, thrown aside. My body tumbled backward, my back slamming into a hard edge. It was a desk. My lower back struck the edge, the pain making my vision go white. My whole body went limp, and I collapsed to my knees on the cold floor. This was his study, or perhaps a private council chamber. The room was absurdly large, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lining 3 walls, crammed with leather, bound volumes, and scrolls. The vaulted ceiling stretched so high, I couldn't see where it ended, from which hung a massive wrought iron chandelier. Dozens of candles bathed the room in brilliant light. The wall directly opposite the door featured a row of arched floor-to-ceiling windows, beyond which hung a blood-red moon. Tonight was a full moon, and it hung there like an unblinking eye, watching the 2 of us in the room. The air carried the scent of old books, leather, ink, and the smell of burning pine from his clothes. The fireplace was unlit, and the room was cold enough to make one shiver. My skirt was too thin, kneeling on the stone floor. The chill cut into my bones like a knife. He stood before me. The silhouette of his black military uniform was rimmed with gold by the candlelight. His shoulders were truly broad enough to block the doorway. He looked down at me, the candlelight dancing in his dark golden eyes like flames trapped in amber. He was still breathing heavily. The rush, or rather the frantic dragging, of the journey had left his breath uneven. His chest rose and fell sharply, and his clenched fists hung at his sides, knuckles white. Dead silence. I knelt at his feet, and he stood over me, the silence stretching between us. I saw the emotions churning in his eyes, anger, shock, a sense of betrayal, and a deeper pain, as if an old wound had been reopened. He clenched his teeth so tightly that the muscles in his jaw bulged. Then he crouched down. His face came up to mine, too close, close enough that I could see a tiny old scar at the corner of his eyebrow, as if lightly sliced by a blade, close enough that I could smell the lingering scent of aged blood moon in his breath, sweet and bitter with a hint of spice. So close, I could make out the golden patterns in his irises, not evenly distributed, but like shattered amber, each crack recording a past he'd rather not speak of. He reached out with his left hand and clamped it around the back of my neck. That hand was scorching hot, hot as iron just pulled from the fire. His 5 fingers spread apart, the web of his hand locking onto the most vulnerable section of my cervical spine, his thumb pressing precisely against the wolf head brand. The pressure wasn't heavy, but it was precise. the kind that wouldn't choke you, yet made escape utterly impossible. The skin on the back of my neck felt as if a hot iron had been pressed against it once more, goosebumps spreading from my neck all the way up my arms. He spoke. His voice was hoarse, as if gravel were rolling down his throat. "Where does the scent of laurel on you come from?" I opened my mouth but couldn't make a sound. My throat felt stuffed with cotton. Laurel? What's a laurel? I didn't even know what a laurel looked like. They never grew flowers in the servants' quarters, only potatoes and cabbages to fill our bellies. What scent could I possibly have? Sweat, the sour tang of fear, kitchen smoke, or at most the smell of lye from the laundry. "Speak." He tightened his grip. I don't know." My voice trembled violently, my lips quivering. "I don't know what you're talking about, Your Majesty. I don't smell of flowers." "You're lying." His voice wasn't loud, but those two words struck me like two stones. His gaze grew sharper, his dark golden pupils contracted, like a bird of prey locking onto its prey. Closer, closer still, the tip of his nose nearly brushed my cheekbone, his breath steaming against my skin. "This scent." He seemed to be speaking to himself, yet it sounded like a question directed at me. "No one has carried this scent for 300 years. Laurel flowers are offerings to the moon goddess. Only chosen mates emit this scent. The moment every pure-blooded alpha breaks from the shell, this scent is etched into their olfactory memory. It is the ancient blood pact of the wolf pack. And you tell me you didn't know?" His grip tightened again. A faint crack sounded at the base of my neck. "I am a human," I managed to say, almost in tears as they welled up again. "Your Majesty, my lords, I am merely a lowly human servant. I was born in the servants' quarters. My mother died giving birth to me. I have no father, no family, nothing. There is no way I could bear any blood pact of your wolf clan." He suddenly released my neck, grabbed my shoulders instead, and lifted me up, pressing me against the edge of the desk. My back slammed against the hardwood surface. His face loomed over me, candlelight streaming from behind him, casting his features entirely into shadow. All I could see were those gleaming dark gold eyes, like two the wisps floating in the darkness. "You are not human." He spoke those words calmly. Not a shout, not a roar, just terrifyingly calm, as if stating a fact he had already fully confirmed. "If you were just an ordinary human, you wouldn't have triggered the mark left by our ancestors." He raised his right hand on his forearm, where the sleeve had been torn open. The pattern of a silver moon and rose still glowed, faintly flickering like a breath. "This mark is proof of true bloodline destiny. 300 years ago, when my great-grandfather cast the curse, he prophesied that only the blood of destiny could make it appear. Not human blood, not the blood of ordinary wolves, only that one specific bloodline." He paused. I heard the sound of his Adam's apple bobbing, and "the back of your neck." His gaze fell on the back of my neck. The spot where the brand was, I could feel the skin there still burning, as if something beneath it were throbbing, waiting to break through. "That brand isn't a slave mark." What? I froze against the tabletop, my back pressed against the cool mahogany, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. Not a slave brand. How could that be? That brand was seared into my skin when I was 5 by a drunken steward with a branding iron. I remember that smell, the stench of scorched flesh. I screamed for 3 whole hours until my voice was completely hoarse. Afterward, I couldn't tilt my head back for a full month. The wound festered, oozing yellow, foul-smelling pus, and all the other children kept their distance because I reeked of rotting flesh. That was the brand. The ugly slave mark that signified my lowly status. It couldn't be anything else. "What did you say?" My voice was so soft, it was almost inaudible. He didn't answer. He straightened up, walked to the desk, and took a bronze mirror out of a drawer. It was about the size of a palm, with a simple silver border around the edges, and the surface had been polished to a shine. He held the mirror out to me. "Look for yourself." My hand trembled as I took the mirror. The brass mirror was heavy. I turned it to face my profile and neck. Candlelight danced across the surface. My face in the mirror was as pale as paper, my lips bloodless, my eyes red and swollen. Then I tilted the mirror slightly, angling it toward the back of my neck. That brand that had lain hideously on the back of my neck since childhood. It had changed. It was no longer a blurry, crumpled burn scar. It was becoming clearer, as if an invisible hand were redrawing its outline. It was a pattern, a crescent moon. Unlike the moons I usually saw in picture books, the tip of this crescent curved inward so sharply, it was almost closed, forming a shape nearly circular, and at the center of the crescent ring there was a small, raised five-pointed star. My fingers touched it. The skin was hot, not the kind of heat from a fever, but heat radiating from within, as if a small flame had been lit deep inside my body. My fingertips could feel the subtle raised patterns. Every line was smooth and exquisite, nothing like a crude, hastily made brand, but more like some kind of natural mark that had grown onto my skin. This is... I couldn't speak. The silver moon birthmark. Kalian's voice came from above me, low and solemn, like a verdict being pronounced. The emblem passed down through generations of the pure-blood Silver Wolf clan, Leonora's clan. Every silver wolf is born with this birthmark on the back of their neck. The fuller the moon, the clearer the mark. On nights of the full moon, it glows just as yours does now. The Silver Wolf clan. Leonora's clan. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. I am a human. I am a lowly human servant. My mother was a dishwasher in the kitchen who got pregnant by some nameless male servant. She died in childbirth after giving birth to me. No father claimed me. No family came looking for me. I started peeling potatoes in the kitchen at age 3, was branded at 5, and began serving dishes at 9. My 16 years of life were as dull and unremarkable as water in a gutter. Utterly unremarkable. How could I possibly have any connection to the Silver Wolf clan? The Silver Wolves are the second most noble bloodline among the wolf clans, second only to the dark gold wolves of the royal house. They are direct descendants of the moon goddess, and every generation produces the highest-ranking priests and prophets. Their hair is the color of moonlight, their eyes the color of a winter night, and they are forever shrouded in a cool, ethereal aura. Such a lineage, and me, a human who grew up wallowing in the mud of the slave camp. My mother, before she was sold into the slave camp, my voice trembled as fragmented thoughts collided in my mind. She said she was wearing a blue dress, blue, very pretty. That was the only time she ever spoke of her past. I was 4 years old then, barely able to speak. She held me close, her face buried in my hair, her voice soft as a whisper, as if telling a fairy tale that wasn't her own. A blue dress so beautiful with silver thread embroidered on the cuffs. And then it was over. The next day she ran a high fever. On the third day, she died on the straw mat bunk. Her body was dragged out. I don't know where she was buried. A blue dress. Silver thread. It was as if lightning had struck my brain. Those details, those fragments that had never before formed a coherent picture, suddenly clicked into place all at once. The blue dress. Blue is the color of the Silver Wolf clan's priestly robes. Silver thread embroidered on the cuffs. Only nobles are permitted to use silver thread on their garments. The blue dress she called, so beautiful, that wasn't a dress she'd bought. It was a symbol of her lineage. Kalian heard my muttering. He crouched down, bringing his face close to mine once more, the golden patterns in his eyes tightening at the center of his pupils. What was your mother's name? She didn't have a name, I said. No one in the servants' quarters had a name. The overseer called her Alien the dishwasher, and everyone else called her that sickly one. What did she look like? Her hair was a very light color, very, very light, like faded straw. I strained to remember, but my memories from age 4 were too faint. All that remained was a pair of cool hands resting on my forehead and a voice singing so softly. She sang songs about the moon. She sang, "The silver moon shines on the lake, my daughter. Don't cry, your mother watches you walk from the moon." Kalian's breathing stopped. It wasn't a metaphor. He really stopped. I saw his chest stop rising and falling, his Adam's apple frozen halfway up. Then his hand slowly lifted, his fingertips touching my cheek. The movement was so gentle, a world apart from the rough grip just moments before. His fingertips slid from my cheekbone to the corner of my eye, slowly tracing the curve of my eye socket. As if sketching a painting he'd been searching for a very, very long time. "Your eyes are dark brown," he whispered, as if he'd suddenly discovered a earth-shattering secret. But deep down, in the candlelight, if you look at them from a certain angle, there's a ring of silver light. His fingers paused at the corner of my eye, his thumb gently pressing against my lower eyelid. I could feel the rough calluses on his fingertips, worn from gripping swords, drawing bows, and countless years on the battlefield. "Silver wolf blood," he said, enunciating each word, his voice hoarse in a way he himself seemed unable to believe. "Hidden within a human shell. Your mother, or rather your birth mother, must have been a member of the Silver Wolf clan. 16 years ago, an incident occurred within the Silver Wolf clan that silenced the entire tribe. A branch was erased from the family tree, leaving not even a name behind. All records and portraits were burned. Everyone assumed it was just a common family feud." He paused, his gaze growing sharp. But what if it wasn't a feud? What if it was a purge? I stared at him, blankly. 16 years ago, the very year before I was born. He stood up and began pacing the room, his leather boots tapping out a rapid rhythm on the flagstones. The candle flame flickering wildly in the breeze he stirred up. "My father, the late king, was nearly killed in an assassination attempt while hunting. The assassins were a group of human rebels, but for them to lie in ambush on Wolf Clan territory for a month without being detected, there must have been an inside man. The investigation into that assassination eventually fizzled out, because the late king suddenly announced a pardon for all suspects. No one knew why, but what if?" He stopped in his tracks and turned to look at me. Backlit, his eyes looked like two pieces of glowing gold. What if the so-called assassination by human rebels was actually a coup orchestrated from within the Silver Wolf clan? What if the late king didn't grant a pardon, but instead struck some secret deal with the Silver Wolf clan, surrendering the bloodline of the coup's mastermind in exchange for the safety of the other clans? What if your birth mother was that mastermind, stripped of her wolf blood, turned into a human, and cast into the slave camp, while her daughter Yu was hidden there, waiting for rescue that would never come, or forgotten entirely? My lips were trembling. The fragments in my mind continued to come together, those faint hints of special treatment in the slave camp. The head cook never made me do the heaviest work. The overseer always spared me when he cracked his whip. The old cook always gave me an extra half slice of black bread when she was handing out food. I'd always thought it was because my mother had been well liked in life. But what if that wasn't kindness but fear? What if they all knew my origins, knew that the mark on my neck wasn't a slave brand, but the birthmark of a pure-blooded silver wolf, simply slumbering within a human body waiting for an opportunity to awaken? But why? My voice was so hoarse it was barely audible. Why was my mother turned into a human? If she really was a member of the Wolf Clan, whether it was treason or a coup, they could have just killed her. Why go to all that trouble? Because of you. Kalian's tone suddenly changed. The look in his eyes was no longer one of scrutiny and shock, but a growing sense of discovery, as if he'd suddenly spotted a well in the desert. The silver wolves are the bloodline of the moon goddess. Killing a pure-blooded silver wolf invites divine retribution, a curse of blood that will haunt the wolf slayer's descendants for generations. But you were born, you're a half-breed, half silver wolf, half. Who is your father? I shook my head. No one knew. My mother had never spoken of it. No one in the servants' quarters knew either. The older maids had mentioned her in whispers. So beautiful, I wonder which overseer took a fancy to her. She was dumped here when she got pregnant. They sighed, their voices filled with the sympathy of women who shared the same lowly station. But what if she hadn't been chosen? What if it wasn't consensual at all? What if this was a calculated act of vengeance, to strip away the wolf bloodline, rob her of her power, turn her into a vulnerable human woman, and then force her to give birth to this child of silver wolf lineage in the filthiest of servant quarters, raising the child in mud and humiliation, never to know that the blood flowing through his veins is the oldest and most noble. That is a punishment more cruel than death. Your father. Kalian suddenly stopped short. An expression I had never seen before flashed across his face. Not anger, not shock, but some ancient hatred stirred deep within his bones. He took a step back, then another, as if my face had suddenly transformed into something he could not bear to look upon. Your father. His voice was hoarse, as if he were struggling to maintain his composure. What did he look like? Have you heard anything? I never knew. No one ever mentioned it. Your eyes. He stepped closer, bracing both hands on the edge of the desk, trapping me between him and the surface. His face was only a palm's width from mine, those dark golden eyes frantically searching for something within my pupils. You just said that candlelight reveals a silver ring. But that's not all. Do you know? On a full moon night, when the moonlight shines directly on them, there's a faint golden layer above that silver ring. Gold. He stepped back slightly, allowing the blood-red moonlight from outside the window to fall directly on my face. That beam of moonlight, tinged with silver, streamed through the arched glass and landed on my eyes. I felt something deep within my iris respond, as if it were tightening, yet also unfolding, like a flower sensing sunlight in the darkness. See for yourself. He picked up the bronze mirror and held it out to me once more. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The moonlight fell on my left eye, making the pupil appear translucent. At the edge of the dark brown iris, there was an extremely faint silver halo that only appeared in the moonlight. And above that silver halo, he was right. There was a layer of even finer, paler, almost invisible golden threads, like scattered gold dust on a silver surface. Dark gold. Kalian's voice crashed down from above me. An eye color found only in royal bloodlines, only in people like me. My father's father going back dozens of generations. Can this color be seen in our eyes? Do you understand what that means? My grip loosened. The bronze mirror fell to the ground with a sharp clang. The mirror struck the stone slab, splitting open with the lightning. Like crack, my face was split in two by the fissure, one half steeped in shadow, the other half glowing in the moonlight. It means. Your father, Kalian said, enunciating each word with a reverent dread in his voice, was the late king. He was of royal blood. You carry not only the blood of the silver wolf, but also the blood of royalty. You are not merely the silver wolf's orphan. You are mine. He stopped. The word caught in his throat. He could not bring himself to say it. But there was no need to say it. The air in the entire room was vibrating. Every candle flame swaying violently, and his shadow on the wall was stretching and twisting like a giant beast in agony. I am the daughter of the late king. I am of royal blood. I am his by blood sister. Those words felt like a rusty knife, thrusting itself brutally into my chest. It wasn't pain. It was something far more terrifying than pain, the sensation of the entire world collapsing. My ears began to buzz, as if 1,000 bees were swarming inside my skull. Royal bloodline, the late king's daughter, his sister. I recognized every one of those words, but when strung together, they became a language I couldn't possibly understand. Impossible. I heard my own voice coming from far away, shrill and distorted as if someone else were speaking. I'm from the servant camp. I'm a lowly human. I'm not. This can't be. Kalian didn't answer. He just looked at me, his dark golden eyes reflecting the candlelight and the blood moon, his expression too complex to decipher. After a very long time, he reached across the desk and picked up a silver cup, still half filled with water. He didn't drink. Instead, he held the cup out to me. Look into it. My fingers stiffened as I took the cup. The water's surface rippled, shattering the reflection into chaos. But within those shards, I saw it moonlight streaming in through the window, piercing my pupils, and in the deepest part, that ring of silver and finer golden threads emerged with crystal clarity. Like a birthmark, like a brand, like some mark etched into the soul. My hand went limp, and the silver cup fell, spilling water all over the floor. My mother, the late king, how could he? My voice shattered into fragments, unable to form a sentence. It felt as if a blade were scraping my throat. She was a dishwashing maid. She was sold into the household. She was a silver wolf noble stripped of her bloodline. Kalian's tone suddenly turned cold, not the cold of indifference, but a deliberate, controlled chill, as if he feared losing control of his emotions. The wolf clan's bloodline can be stripped away. Do you know what kind of torture that is? Extracting the silver marrow from the bones, strand by strand, like unraveling a cocoon. Silver marrow is the source of a wolf's power. Once it's taken, the body degenerates into that of an ordinary human, even more fragile than a human. This process lasts a full 3 days, every second of it excruciating. Many don't survive past the first day and bite their tongues to end it. He paused, his Adam's apple bobbing. Your mother endured 3 days. Tears welled up in my eyes, scalding hot, falling in heavy drops onto the stone floor. My mother, that woman who, in my memory, was always pale and frail, her singing voice as soft as dewdrops. That woman who rambled deliriously with a fever on a bed of straw, only to grow as still as a fallen leaf in the end. She endured the bone, marrow extraction, endured the humiliation of becoming human, endured the inhuman life in the slave camp, gave birth to me, and then died silently in her sickness. And I didn't even remember her face. Why did you do this to her? My voice grew hoarse, tinged with a rage I'd never heard in myself before. If she was a traitor, just kill her. Why subject her to this torture? Because someone was protecting you. Kalian cut me off. His voice was hushed, but every word felt like a nail driven into wood. Marrow. Extraction isn't a death sentence. Turning her into a human and casting her into the servant camp was the only way to ensure the survival of a pure-blooded silver wolf descendant. Wolf clan law dictates that the offspring of pure-blooded traitors must die. But if they are half-bloods, especially those with royal blood, they are granted immunity. Your father, the late king, likely knew of your existence before you were even born. He couldn't acknowledge you publicly because the Silver Wolf clan was under investigation at the time. Acknowledging you would only make you a political target, but he gave your mother a way out, to sever your bloodline, conceal your identity, and hide you in the most inconspicuous of the servant camps, so that everyone would believe you were nothing more than a lowly human bastard. I gasped. Then why didn't he come to get me? Kalian didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, turning his back to me, the moonlight casting a blood-red halo around his broad shoulders. His silhouette resembled a solitary mountain. He remained silent for a long time before speaking. His voice was soft, so soft it was almost as if he were talking to himself. Because he died 3 months after you were born. The assassination attempt. Kalian's fingertips tapped against the window pane, producing a dull thudding sound. During that hunt, he was severely wounded. On the surface, it looked like the work of human rebels, but the assassin's weapon was coated with silver marrow poison, a toxin only the wolf clan knows how to refine. He held on for months, until you were born, and only let out that final breath after confirming that you and your mother had been safely moved. He turned away, his expression split between moonlight and shadow. I was only a year old then. He didn't tell me anything before he died. He just gripped my wrist and said something very strange. Protect the invisible moon, it will rise beneath the blood moon. Everyone thought he was rambling because the moon turns red on the night of the blood moon anyway. But now I understand he was talking about you, the invisible moon, because you were hidden in the darkness. Rising beneath the blood moon, because tonight, under the witness of the blood moon, your mark has awakened. My body was trembling. It wasn't from the cold. It was some kind of uncontrollable, instinctive reaction welling up from the depths of my marrow. The back of my neck where the birthmark was felt so hot it was almost burning. The blood moon outside the window seemed to sense something. The moonlight suddenly grew brighter, and a crimson glow poured in like flowing blood, etching twisted patches of light onto the floor. Kalian walked back to his desk and pulled a scroll of parchment from a locked drawer. The paper was yellowed and brittle, its edges charred black as if scorched by fire. He unfolded it carefully and laid it flat on the desk. Written on it in ancient wolf clan script was a passage, the characters appearing in a dark red hue. It wasn't ink but blood. This is a prophecy from 300 years ago, written in the blood of the last high priest of the moon. His finger traced the parchment as he read it aloud, word for word. The forgotten servant, bearing the flower of new life, shall tear the crown with the blood of destiny. Roses entwine the moon, silver and gold intertwine. Forbidden love shall burn the old laws. When the blood moon illuminates the same face 3 times, the gates of the abyss shall open, and upon the throne there shall be either true love or bleached bones. My blood ran cold. The forgotten servant. Kalian looked up at me. You, the human servant forgotten in the servant camp, bearing the flower of new birth. Your scent, the laurel flower, the flower of new birth of the moon goddess. The blood of destiny tears the crown. Your lineage, half silver wolf, half royal. Once revealed, the entire royal line's claim to the throne will be torn apart. Silver and gold intertwined. Your eyes. A forbidden love burns the old laws. His voice dropped, like sand slipping through his fingers. Do you understand the meaning of that last line? When the blood moon shines upon the same face 3 times, today is the first. This is the first full moon night your true form has been exposed. You will experience it twice more. By the 3rd time the prophecy will be fulfilled. The gates of the abyss shall open, and there are only 2 possible outcomes, true love or bleached bones. He raised his eyes. My pale, contorted face was reflected in his dark golden pupils. This prophecy isn't about anyone else. It's about you and me. Royal blood flows through your veins, the same as mine, yet you are also my chosen one. The chosen one is the mate designated by the moon goddess for every alpha. It is an instinct etched into our bloodline that cannot be resisted. Yet the ancient laws of the wolf clan strictly forbid unions between blood relatives. Those who violate this law will be devoured by their own bloodline, turning into mindless beasts into bone-dry ones. It is a dead end. My legs gave out completely. I slid down the desk and collapsed onto the floor. The stone floor was as cold as ice, but I could no longer feel the chill. The flood of information surging through my mind was too much, too intense, like a torrent breaching a dam. Everything was spinning. My mother's face, the shadow of the late king, the torture of having my silver marrow extracted, the prophecy from 300 years ago, forbidden love, the bone-dry ones, and the 3 blood moons. I don't want this, I said, hugging my shoulders, my nails digging into my flesh, my voice muffled against my knees. I don't want to be the chosen one, or the silver wolf's orphan, or anything at all. I just want to live a simple life. Footsteps. Kalian crouched down in front of me. He didn't touch me, but I could feel his body heat just inches away. His hand hovered in the air, hesitated for a moment, then finally settled on the top of my head. That hand was heavy and hot. His palm rested on my hair, his thumb gently stroking the corner of my forehead. I don't want it either. His voice was hoarse, almost inaudible. The Wolf King who held the power of life and death, the Alpha who had slaughtered 3 rebellious clans, and whose roar could make rivers run dry. He was now crouched before a lowly attendant, his hand resting on her head, uttering those words. "You are my sister," he said. A note of something shattered in his voice. "My father's daughter, my blood kin. And yet you are also my destined mate, my true love. These 2 identities should not coexist, yet they both reside within you alone. I don't know what to do. From the day I was born until now, I have never once said the words, 'I don't know what to do.'" He withdrew his hand. He stood up, took 2 steps back, and created some distance, like someone who had been burned, instinctively moving away from the source of the flame. But prophecies wait for no one. The blood moon illuminated your face for the first time tonight, and those people outside. His gaze swept toward the study's tightly closed door, and he lowered his voice. They all saw it. Leonora, the eldest daughter of the Silver Wolf clan, she saw it. The elders behind her will receive word soon. The Silver Wolf clan once went so far as to stage a coup to conceal your mother's secret. Now that you've reappeared, bearing both royal blood and the title of Chosen One, what do you think they'll do? Do you really believe they'll let you live? Suddenly, a rush of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. No, not just one set. It was multiple people. The footsteps were chaotic and heavy, mixed with the clanging of metal armor. Some were running, others growling. Immediately afterward, a deep, gruff male voice rang out from outside the door. "Your Majesty, Elder Fiend of the Silver Wolf clan requests an audience, claiming there is an urgent clan matter." Kalian's body tensed in an instant. He turned his head with the speed of a wild beast, veins bulging in his neck. He glanced at me and whispered, "Don't make a sound." Then he strode toward the door, opened it a crack, and said coldly to the person outside, "Tell him to wait. I'm not seeing anyone right now. But Your Majesty, the elder is accompanied by 30 Silver Wolf guards. They've already..." Before the words were finished, a dull thud echoed from beyond the door, as if something heavy had crashed onto the floor of the antechamber. Immediately afterward came the roar of anger, the shriek of terror, and the sharp screech of blades being drawn from their sheaths. Kalian slammed the door shut, spun back to face me, and grabbed my shoulders, yanking me to my feet. They didn't come to ask for an audience, they came to take someone. His pupils contracted into vertical slits, an instinctive reaction unique to the Wolf clan in moments of intense rage or fear. The Silver Wolf clan won't let you live to see the next full moon. Leonora must have already sent word back. They're moving too fast. They're going to kill me? I heard my own voice trembling like a leaf in the autumn wind. No, Kieran's fingers tightened and loosened around my shoulders, over and over. It's worse than death. They'll take you away, extract your silver marrow, just as they did to your mother all those years ago. Render your bloodline useless, then strip the mark from you and transplant it onto Leonora. The chosen one of the prophecy is the bearer of the silver moon rose mark. As long as the mark is on you, you are irreplaceable. But the mark can be stripped away, though the agony is no less than that of marrow extraction, and the odds of survival are slim. But for the Silver Wolf clan, sacrificing you to make Leonora the chosen one is a bargain they're more than willing to pay. My mind exploded with a buzzing roar. They were going to strip my mark away. The back of my neck, that silver moon birthmark that had just appeared, glowing and burning hot, would be cut out while I was still alive and grafted onto another woman. And I, like my mother, would have all my power drained away, turned into an empty shell, and then left to rot away in some corner. No. I shook my head frantically, my hair flinging across my face, my cheeks smeared with tears and snot. I don't want this. I don't want my essence drained. I don't want my essence drained. You won't. Carrion's hands pinned my face, forcing me to look at him. His face was only a palm's width away from mine, and his dark golden eyes burned with a resolve I couldn't fathom. His thumb wiped away the tears from the corner of my eye, the rough calluses on it stinging my skin. You are my destined one, and you are my father's daughter. I won't let anyone lay a finger on you, but... He took a deep breath, his chest swelling as if gathering some kind of power. Now the entire palace knows of your existence. The Silver Wolf clan has already made their move. The other clans will soon get involved as well. The return of royal blood means a reshuffling of the line of succession, and no one will let this opportunity slip by. We're running out of time. He released my face and turned to take a sword from the wall. The scabbard was made of black iron, the hilt wrapped in deep red leather cord, its end inlaid with a dark golden wolf's eye stone. He drew the blade with one hand, the cold steel flashed in the candlelight, and the temperature in the study seemed to drop several degrees. I'm taking you somewhere, he said, snatching a black cloak from the coat rack and wrapping it around me. Somewhere the Silver Wolf clan can't reach. But you must trust me. From this moment on, you must stay right by my side every step of the way. Do exactly as I say. No hesitation, no turning back, do you understand? The cloak was heavy, carrying the scent of pine and iron that clung to him. I wrapped it tightly around myself. My fingers were still trembling. But somewhere deep inside, a sudden stillness settled over me. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because of that numb calm that comes when one is backed into a corner. I looked up at the man I'd only just recognized as brother, who was fastening his sword to his waist with a swiftness that suggested he'd done it 1,000 times. The candlelight flickered across his face. There was no hesitation there, only a cold, hard expression ready for battle. Understood. My voice was still hoarse, but the trembling had subsided somewhat. He glanced at me, the line at the corner of his mouth seeming to relax by less than a millimeter. Then he strode toward the other side of the study, where a secret door lay, hidden behind a bookshelf completely inconspicuous under normal circumstances. He pressed his hand against a brick at the edge of the bookshelf and pushed inward. The entire bookshelf slid open, silently, revealing a pitch-black entrance. A damp breeze carrying the scent of earth and moss surged out from within, causing the candle flame to flicker violently. This is a secret passage to the palace, he said, turning to offer me his hand, palm up. For the first time, a look uncharacteristic of the Wolf King flashed across his hardened face, faint, fleeting, yet unmistakable like a crack. Stay close to me. I placed my hand in his. His grip tightened instantly, pulling me close to his side. The darkness at the entrance to the secret passage swallowed us like a gaping mouth. The bookshelves behind us slowly closed, cutting us off from the clamor outside, the clang of armor, and the roars of the Silver Wolf guards. Footsteps echoed through the narrow passageway, and the dripping sound of water seeping from cracks in the stone walls sounded like some ancient rhythm. He led the way, his sword unsheathed, its cold gleam flickering in the darkness. I followed a step behind him, my hand aching from his tight grip. Yet I dared not let go. The passage sloped downward, growing ever deeper. The air grew colder, the stone walls wetter. We walked for a long time, perhaps a quarter of an hour, perhaps half an hour, until a faint light finally appeared ahead. It was an abandoned, underground temple. Half the dome had collapsed, and moonlight poured through the gap, illuminating a massive stone statue. It was the moon goddess. Her face had been eroded by time into an indistinct blur, but her posture remained dignified, one hand cradling a crescent moon, the other pointing toward the ground. At her feet lay an altar, its surface carved with ancient runes, each glowing with a faint silver light in the moonlight. Kalian released my hand, walked to the altar, and knelt on one knee. He planted his sword into the ground before him, clasped his hands over the pommel, bowed his head, closed his eyes, and spoke in a low, reverent voice. By the moon goddess, I, Kieran Bloodmoon Darkgold, the 17th Alpha Wolf King, offer my plea in this sacred hall. Grant your chosen one sanctuary, using my bloodline as a shield and my life as the price. Let no silver wolf enter this place. Let no steel harm her, and let no conspiracy draw near, until the blood moon has risen 3 times, and the hour of destiny finally arrives. As he spoke, the silver moon and rose mark on his forearm suddenly burst into a blinding light, more than 10 times brighter than it had been in the banquet hall. The beam struck the goddess statue, seemed to reflect off it, and then bounce back toward me. The back of my neck instantly grew unbearably hot, not from pain, but from a sensation of being filled, as if something were being poured into me. The birthmark was glowing. I could even see the interplay of silver and crimson light through the fabric of my cloak. Then, the runes surrounding the altar began to light up in concentric circles. Those dark, etched grooves seemed to have been infused with moonlight. Silvery liquid flowed slowly through the channels, following predetermined paths from the outside in, layer by layer, illuminating the entire underground sanctuary. A strange floral scent filled the air, faint, crisp, with a hint of bitterness, the scent of laurel blossoms. Tears welled up in my eyes again, not out of fear nor out of sorrow, but as some more instinctive physical reaction. It was as if my blood recognized this scent, recognized this light, recognized every single stone in this abandoned temple. I knelt, not because I was forced to, but because my knees bent of their own accord. My cloak slipped from my shoulders, and the moonlight fell upon me unobstructed, on my hair, my face, and the glowing birthmark at the nape of my neck. Kalian turned to look at me from the altar. Backlit, his silhouette was rimmed in silver, and the harsh lines of his face were softened considerably by the light. He looked at me, his eyes holding many things, but what was clearest was pain. It was the pain of recognizing one another, yet knowing we should not have. The first barrier has been erected. His voice sounded weary, as if the oath he'd just sworn had drained him of considerable strength. The Silver Wolf clan won't be able to find this place for now, but you can't hide here forever. The blood moon will rise again, a second time, a third time. Before that happens, we must settle one thing. He stood up, walked over to me, and crouched down. His fingers gently lifted my chin, and his thumb wiped away the tear streaks on my cheek. The movement was so gentle, completely at odds with his rough exterior. Do you hate him? Who? Our father. The golden patterns in his pupils contracted slightly. He hid you in the mud for 16 years, made you suffer, kept you in the dark about who you are, and forced you to live like a rat in the slave camp. Do you hate him? I opened my mouth. Hate. I didn't even know what he looked like. I'd never known I had a father. None of the children in the servant camp had fathers. It was simply the way of things. My mother never spoke of him, nor did she ever express any resentment. She would only sing occasionally that song of the moon, her voice growing fainter toward the end like lamp oil burning out. I'd never even considered whom I should hate. But now, kneeling in this moonlit, abandoned temple, the birthmark on the back of my neck still burning hot, I finally had a father, a wolf king who had been dead for 16 years. Did he pay with his life to protect me, or was he merely atoning for his sins? What he did to my mother, was it protection or cruelty? I don't know. I heard my own voice, soft but steady. But I hate those who tortured my mother like that. I hate those who drained her silver marrow. If they were the Silver Wolf clan, then yes, I hate them. Kalian looked at me, the pain in his eyes deepening. He released my chin, and his fingers moved to the back of my neck, pressing against the glowing birthmark. His palm covered that burning patch of skin, and the heat from his hand spread through my entire body. Then our enemies are the same group. The Silver Wolf clan has been manipulating the fate of this kingdom for 300 years. The prophecy says, "The blood of destiny will tear the crown." Perhaps it doesn't mean you will destroy the royal family, but that you will tear apart the poisonous web the Silver Wolf clan has woven around the crown. He withdrew his hand, stood up, and resumed his cold, stern demeanor as the Wolf King. Rest now. Dawn is approaching. This temple is invisible in daylight. The silver wolves won't find it. But you've expended too much energy tonight. He took a folded old blanket from the stone ledge by the altar, shook it out, and draped it over me. Starting tomorrow, I'll tell you everything. The curse from 300 years ago, the price of being the chosen one, the Silver Wolf clan's conspiracy, and why the prophecy says there can only be one outcome between us. He turned and walked to the other side of the temple, sitting down with his back against a broken stone pillar. He laid his sword across his knees and closed his eyes. Wrapped in the blanket, I curled up at the foot of the altar. Moonlight flowed like water, and the scent of flowers lingered faintly. The birthmark on the back of my neck was still faintly warm, like a small stove, warming my entire back. I closed my eyes, my mind still replaying all the images from this mad night. The arc of the spilling wine, his dark golden eyes, the torn cuffs of his shirt, the glowing silver moon rose, the darkness of the secret passage, the moonlight in the temple. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I suddenly heard his voice coming from the far end of the temple, very soft, as if spoken to the air. "I've always known you were here." I opened my eyes, but he didn't continue. Only the sound of his steady breathing echoed softly off the stone walls. I closed my eyes again. Moonlight lay upon my forehead like a mother's hand, and that ancient song resounded from the depths of my memory. "The silver moon shines upon the lake. Daughter, do not weep, for your mother watches you walk from the moon." Mother, you have waited 16 years for me. I have returned. But the journey home has only just begun. When I woke up, the moonlight had vanished. It wasn't the kind of vanishing that happens when clouds roll in. It was a complete darkness, as if someone had snuffed it out through a crack in the dome. In the underground temple, there was no sunlight, no moonlight, only a faint silver glow lingering from the runes around the altar, like the final gasp of embers about to burn out. I lay on the cold stone slab, covered by that old blanket, my back aching from the hardness. The scent of laurel in the air had faded, replaced by a more pungent odor. Rust, no, not rust blood. I sat up abruptly. "Kalian?" My voice echoed through the empty temple, but there was no reply. The glow of the runes on the altar grew fainter and fainter, like the fingers of a drowning man struggling at the water's surface in his final moments. My eyes strained to adjust to the darkness, and I finally managed to make out the scene on the other side of the temple. Kalian was still there beneath the broken stone pillar. He wasn't lying down. He was in a half-kneeling position, one hand braced against the ground, the other clutching his sword. His head hung low, his short black hair obscuring his face. "Kalian." Wrapped in a blanket, I rushed over, my feet slipping on the stone floor, nearly causing me to fall. As I neared him, the stench of blood was so thick it nearly made me vomit. His black military uniform was torn open across his chest, not from a sword or knife, but as if something had ripped it from the inside out. The fabric around the gash was soaked through with blood. Dark red liquid was still trickling down the contours of his abdominal muscles, dripping onto the stone floor and pooling into a small puddle. "You're hurt. Those people last night." My hands were shaking violently. I wanted to touch him but dared not. "Did the Silver Wolf clan hurt you in the secret passage?" He didn't answer. After a few seconds, he slowly raised his head. My heart skipped a beat. His face was at least 2 shades paler than it had been last night. It wasn't the pallor of blood loss, his lips still had color, and his cheeks weren't sunken. It was a different, more eerie kind of white, as if the blood beneath his skin were fading away. What frightened me most were his eyes. Those dark golden pupils now looked like 2 lamps running low on power. The gold was fading, revealing an underlying hue that bordered on gray. The area around his eyes was covered in fine spiderweb, like black blood vessels, spreading from his temples all the way to his cheekbones. "It wasn't them who did this," he said, his voice so hoarse it was barely recognizable as his own. "It's the backlash from the prophecy. Last night I swore a blood oath of protection, forcibly activating the temple's seal. But the rules of the Chosen One's contract state, an Alpha must first complete the marking before providing sanctuary to a mate. You are my Chosen One, yet I have not marked you. So every time I draw upon the power of the blood oath, the contract strikes back at me." He paused, a nearly self-deprecating curve tugging at the corners of his mouth. "To put it simply, I took the moon goddess's punishment head on. I didn't die, but it wasn't pleasant." Marking. The word felt like a stone dropping into my stomach. In the world of the Wolf Clan, marking means the Alpha uses his teeth to inject his pheromones into the birthmark on his mate's nape, forming an eternal soul bond. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a true physical act of possession. The marked mate would henceforth respond only to that Alpha, and the Alpha would hold the mate's life above all else. But at the same time, marking was irreversible. Once completed, it could never be undone unless one party died. "You have to mark me?" I heard my own voice sound strange, high-pitched and shrill. "But we're blood relatives, right?" Kieran coughed, a trickle of blood spilling from the corner of his mouth, which he wiped away with his thumb. "That's the cruelest part of the prophecy. You are my true love, but you are also my half-sister. If I mark you, the blood curse of our forbidden love will be triggered. They say it's more painful than death, where consciousness fades away, leaving only a shell of a body ruled by bestial instincts. Becoming a bone wraith is the other outcome mentioned in the prophecy. If I do not mark you, I cannot draw upon the power of the blood oath to protect you. Without my protection, the Silver Wolf clan will find you sooner or later, drain your silver marrow, strip away your mark, and then kill you." He pushed himself up with his sword. His movements were much slower than usual, and his knees were trembling. Once he was on his feet, he staggered and had to reach out to steady himself against a stone pillar. Fresh blood seeped from the wound, or rather the gash in his abdomen. "So this is the choice the prophecy has given me," he said, sheathing his sword and lifting his gaze to meet mine. His fading eyes held both resolve and despair. "Either mark you and become a withered bone, or not mark you and watch you die. Take your pick. There can't be only 2 choices." I don't know where I found the courage, but I yanked the blanket off my body and tore off a long strip of fabric. Those hands, long accustomed to carrying trays, had shifted from their initial violent trembling to a kind of forced composure, just like the moment last night in the secret passage when he pulled me behind him, and my heart strangely grew still. The prophecy says, either true love or withered bones. Since it says or, that means both outcomes are possible. You don't have to choose one. I pressed the strip of cloth against the wound on his abdomen. My fingers touched his blood-soaked skin. It was terrifyingly hot. His body temperature was at least 3 or 4 degrees higher than normal, as if something were burning inside him. He looked down at my hand, his Adam's apple bobbed, but he didn't speak. You said you'd tell me everything. I applied a little more pressure, wrapping the cloth tightly. As my fingertips traced the curve of his waist, I could feel his abdominal muscles tensing in pain. The curse from 300 years ago, the price of being the chosen one, the Silver Wolf clan's conspiracy. Tell me now. Don't say there's no time anymore. If I'm going to die, I want to know why. Silence. A very, very long silence. Long enough for the light from the final ring of runes in the temple to fade completely. Long enough for my eyes to finally adjust fully to the darkness, allowing me to make out every tiny old scar on his face. Then he sighed, the kind of sigh squeezed from the depths of his bones. A sigh of resignation. All right. He sat back down beneath the stone pillar, his back against the cold stone, and gestured for me to sit across from him. I sat down beside him, my shoulder just a fist's width away, able to feel the heat radiating from his body. He placed his sword horizontally between us, the wolf's-eye stone on the hilt, flickering in the lingering dim light. 300 years ago, he began, his voice lower and steadier, as if recounting an ancient tale he told countless times. The Wolf Clan and the vampires fought a war of annihilation. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. At the very last moment, the Wolf King of that time made a deal with the Moon Goddess to gain enough power to win the war. The goddess granted the royal line a blood pact with the Chosen One. Every generation of Wolf Kings would have a destined mate, and this mate would possess power bestowed directly by the Moon Goddess. With this power, the wolves ultimately defeated the vampires and established the kingdom we know today. Sounds like a good deal, I said. The price is in the second half of the deal. The corner of his mouth twitched again, this time not with sarcasm, but with a deeper, resigned acceptance of fate. The Moon Goddess's power is too great. An ordinary wolf's body cannot withstand it. So, after the marking is complete, the Chosen One pours all her power into the Alpha's body, and then withers away. Literally withers away. Her life is drained, leaving her a hollow shell. In other words, the emergence of each generation's Chosen One means that woman's death. That is the price of the Chosen One. My hand froze on the cloth, my knuckles stiff. So the Chosen One isn't a blessing? She's a sacrifice, right? Kieran's gaze fell on the shattered statue of the goddess on the altar, his voice eerily calm. Every generation of the Wolf King falls in love with a woman, marks her, and then watches her wither away. That is the weight of the crown. But for 300 years, not a single Wolf King has refused this bargain. Because without the power of the Chosen One, the Wolf Clan cannot win wars or protect its people. Sacrifice one woman to ensure the survival of the entire clan. In the Wolf Clan's values, this is only natural. A wave of bitterness welled up in my throat. Those legendary Chosen Ones, those celebrated great loves, this is the truth behind them. Those women were chosen, marked, and then drained dry, and their sacrifices were written into epics, woven into ballads, and sung at feasts from generation to generation. So my mother was stripped of her bloodline and cast into the slave camp. That wasn't just punishment. Suddenly it all clicked for me. The Silver Wolf Clan doesn't just want to erase the rebels' traces. They also want to ensure there is no Chosen One in this generation. Because if the Chosen One doesn't exist, then the royal family won't receive the goddess's power. Kalian picked up where I left off, his tone turning sharp. Without that power, the royal family will gradually be weakened in the balance of power. As the second most prestigious bloodline, the Silver Wolf Clan has been waiting in the shadows for this opportunity. They don't seek to replace the royal family. They wouldn't dare openly usurp the throne. What they want is to render them powerless, to turn the royal family into an empty shell, while the true power lies in the hands of the Silver Wolf clan. He closed his eyes, as if gathering strength, and continued after a moment. The so-called assassination by human rebels was actually orchestrated by the Silver Wolf clan themselves. My father, the late king, was poisoned with silver marrow during a hunt. The assassins were, of course, members of the Silver Wolf clan, merely disguised as human rebels. Their plan was flawless: kill the late king, then, while I was still an infant and unable to rule, take control of the entire royal court under the guise of a regent. But they overlooked two things. What were those two things? First, my father didn't die on the spot at the hunting grounds. He was poisoned by the silver marrow, but his body was too strong. He managed to hold on for several months before dying. During those months, he mounted a counterattack. He uncovered the mole, executed the 7 core members of the Silver Wolf clan within the court, and forced the Silver Wolf clan leader to sign a blood oath promising never to reveal the coup. He opened his eyes. The golden patterns in his pupils seemed to regain a little of their brightness. The second thing is you, me. The Silver Wolf clan doesn't know you exist. They believed your mother, that traitor who had her silver marrow drained, had lost the ability to bear children. It is common knowledge that a human body cannot sustain a wolf's fetus. Yet your mother gave birth to you anyway. Not only did you survive, but you grew to the age of 16 in the servants' quarters. Moreover, you possess both the Silver Wolf and royal bloodlines, something that has never occurred in the history of the Wolf clan. That is why you triggered that prophecy. I looked down at my hands. These hands that had picked vegetable leaves for 16 years and washed dishes for 16 years. There was old grime under my fingernails. My knuckles were rough, and my palms were thick with calluses. These were the hands of a lowly human servant. Yet the body of their master was coursing with 2 of the noblest strains of wolf blood. The prophecy says, "The blood of destiny shall tear the crown." I whispered the words etched on the parchment. You mean, the crack in the crown has existed for 300 years. It has been there since the moment the first Wolf King made a deal with the moon goddess. The chosen one system, the Silver Wolf clan's ambitions, the royal family's reliance on the goddess's power. All these things maintain a fragile balance, yet at the same time bind the entire kingdom to a dead end. Kalian's voice grew heavy. And you, a half-breed with both royal and silver wolf blood, have been the greatest wild card in this stalemate from the moment you were born. The prophecy isn't saying you'll destroy the throne. It's saying you'll tear apart all the old shackles bound to the crown. He paused, a bitter curve forming at the corner of his mouth. Last night, when I pulled you into the secret passage, there was actually a moment when I considered handing you over to the Silver Wolf clan, letting them strip away your mark and erase your existence. That way, the prophecy wouldn't continue to unfold, and I wouldn't face the deadlock of marking you. This kingdom could keep functioning within its old balance, everything as it was. My heart sank, but he wasn't finished. That moment lasted only a second. He turned to face me, and those fading dark gold eyes suddenly grew intense, churning with something more primal, unfiltered by reason. Because immediately afterward, my bloodline instinct choked me. You are my destined one. What is etched into my bones, those instincts older than reason, stronger than power, will not allow anyone to harm you, not even myself. He reached out, his fingers touching the back of my neck once more. His fingertips pressed against the silver crescent birthmark. The touch was light, yet a jolt of electricity shot down my entire spine in that instant. A cursed fate has bound the two of us. There is no escape, no way around it. The blood moon will rise twice more. Before then, if we cannot find a way to break the pact made 300 years ago. He didn't finish his sentence, but I knew the outcome without him saying a word. Either he marks me and I turn to bone, or he doesn't mark me and I'm captured by the Silver Wolf clan, my marrow drained and my mark stripped away until I die. On the chessboard of prophecy, every piece points to the same dead end. Unless we shatter the chessboard itself, you said, the forgotten servant, bearing the flower of new birth. I spoke suddenly, a vague thought taking shape in my mind. Does the flower of new birth in the prophecy refer to the laurel flower? Yes, the laurel flower is the sacred object of the moon goddess. It blooms only on the night of the blood moon. Its scent is the mark of the chosen one. Every alpha can smell it. That's how you recognized me last night. Where can I find a laurel flower? Kalian looked at me, his pupils contracting slightly. He had clearly caught on to what was going through my mind. What are you planning? If the prophecy could foretell my arrival, then it must also have foretold a solution, I said, my voice calmer than I'd intended. Or true love, or a withered bone. The praise itself suggests there is a second path. True love, not love as a sacrifice, not love that is marked and then withers. Something that can break the bargain itself. If the laurel is the token of the goddess's pact with the wolf clan, then it must also be the key to ending it. I need to find it. He stared at me for a long time. Long enough for the darkness outside the temple to begin to fade, and for the first streak of gray-blue morning light to seep through the cracks in the dome. The light fell on his face, making the black veins that had surfaced due to the backlash of the blood oath even more striking. His lips moved slightly, then pressed tight again. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down 3 or 4 times. Cliff of the broken moon, he finally spoke, a tremor, whether from fear, anger, or something else, struggling to be suppressed in his voice. At the northernmost edge of the kingdom's borders, beyond the reach of the royal court, there is a grove of laurel trees there, planted 300 years ago by the goddess herself. Legend has it that beneath every laurel tree lie the ashes of a withered chosen one. The Silver Wolf clan has declared it a forbidden zone and stationed a heavy garrison there. No one can get near it, but you know how to get there. It wasn't a question. I could already read the answer in the shift of his tone. He did know, and he had likely already considered this plan. He was just waiting for me to bring it up. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if making an extremely difficult decision. Then he opened them, his gaze burning with a madness that bet everything on this. The path to Broken Moon Cliff runs through the Silver Wolf clan's territory, over the Bone Mountains of the north and across a desolate swamp. I took that route once when I was a teenager. Back then I was investigating the true cause of my father's death. The road is littered with Silver Wolf clan checkpoints, and the farther we get from the royal court, the weaker my blood oath power becomes. By the time we reach the Moonbreak Cliffs, I might not even be able to shapeshift. He grabbed my wrist so hard my bones creaked. He leaned in, his fading yet still, mesmerizing eyes locked firmly on me. But if you want to go, I'll take you. Let's take a gamble. Bet that the true love spoken of in the prophecy isn't a dead end, but a path to life. Bet that this life of yours hidden away for 16 years isn't just meant to be a sacrifice. Outside the temple, the morning light grew brighter. The rays streaming through the cracks in the dome shifted from gray, blue to pale gold, illuminating the blurred statue of the goddess on the altar. For a single moment, the light fell precisely on the goddess's raised fingertip. That finger pointing toward the altar seemed to glow faintly under the sun's kiss. I made out the inscriptions on the altar that I hadn't noticed before. They were tiny and shallow, as if someone had carved them out one by one with their finger. They were crooked and uneven, not ancient script, but written in the contemporary Wolf Clan language. Daughter, if you ever come here, trust no one, except the one who bleeds for you. My fingernails dug into the palm of my hand. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I recognized the way it was carved, that stubborn determination to finish every stroke, even if it meant splitting one's fingernails. It was just like that when my mother taught me to write my name in the servants' quarters. No pen, no paper. She traced it with her fingernails in the dirt. When she was done, she'd have me smooth it out with my palm, then draw it again. She said, "Remember your name. Even if everyone else forgets you, you must remember who you are." But she never taught me how to write my name, because even she didn't know what to name me. "What's wrong?" Kalian noticed the change in my expression. I pointed to the inscriptions on the altar. He leaned in to look, furrowing his brow, then ran his finger over the engravings. His fingertip trembled the moment it touched the characters. "These characters have been carved here for at least a decade or more. This is my father's secret sanctuary. No one but a blood relative of the royal family can enter. The mechanism of this secret passage can only be triggered by royal blood." "But didn't your mother lose her silver marrow? She should be just an ordinary human." "She lost her silver marrow, but she's still my mom." My voice suddenly steadied, so steady it felt unfamiliar even to me. She must have come here at some point between giving birth to me and her death. Somehow, she must have activated the secret passage's mechanism. Then she knelt before this altar and carved this message for me, letter by letter with her fingernails. My fingers traced the crooked yet complete engravings, stroke by stroke, just as she used to hold my hand and draw circles in the dirt when I was a child. "Trust no one, except the one who bleeds for you." I turned my head and looked at the blood-soaked strip of cloth on Kieran's chest. He had bled for me, not out of compulsion, not by design, but when I was nothing, merely a lowly servant who'd spilled wine. He had already stood in front of me, and he is my brother, and destined to be mine. After dawn, the Silver Wolf clan will seal off the entire royal city. Kalian stood up and fastened his sword back to his waist, his movements a bit more precise than before. The backlash of the blood oath seemed to be slowly fading. "We'll leave now before they've had time to react. We'll take the abandoned hunting trail to the north to get out of the city. But that path is rough. We'll have to cross." His words suddenly trailed off. His ears twitched. His ears, a wolf's hearing, is dozens of times sharper than a human's. I saw his pupils contract sharply, his body tensing instantly, like a beast that had caught the scent of a hunter. The next second, he grabbed my shoulders and pressed me behind a stone pillar, positioning himself in front of me, his right hand already resting on the hilt of his sword. "Someone has opened the secret passage." His voice was so low it was barely audible, little more than a whisper. "Not an ordinary soldier. The footsteps are too light. There are no more than 3 people in the entire royal court who could reach the entrance to the secret passage without alerting me." His fingers tightened around the hilt, his knuckles turning white. Deep within the secret passage above the temple, a faint glimmer flickered as it drew nearer. It was not the light of a torch, but something colder and whiter, as if moonlight had been captured on the surface of some object and reflected back. As the light approached, a slender figure emerged from the passageway and stood beneath the temple's collapsed dome. Long, silvery, white hair, an ice-blue robe, eyes the color of a winter night. Leonora. She had brought no guards, no elders. She stood there alone, clutching a glowing orb, the moonstone, the sacred relic of the Silver Wolf clan. Her face bore none of the icy fury she'd shown last night in the banquet hall, nor any schadenfreude, but rather a more complex expression, as if a mask had cracked. "I'm not here to arrest anyone," she said, her voice calm, with a hint of barely perceptible weariness. "If I'd wanted to bring the elders, you wouldn't have been able to get that far down the secret passage last night." Kalian didn't draw his sword, But he didn't let go of it either. His body remained poised, ready to strike at any moment. Then why are you here? Leonora's gaze swept past Kalian's shoulder and landed on me. Those eyes, the color of a winter night, fixed on me for a long time. So long that the temperature in the air seemed to drop a few degrees. Then she did something that took everyone by surprise. She dropped to one knee. Her long silver hair cascaded to the ground. The moonstone rested before her, her hands clasped upon her knee. This was the kneeling salute the Silver Wolf clan reserved solely for their clan leader. "I have come to confess," she said, her voice so steady it sounded less like repentance and more like the reading of a long-suppressed confession. "And to negotiate." The air seemed to freeze. Leonora, the eldest daughter of the Silver Wolf clan, the woman whom all the nobles referred to as the future queen, the woman whose gaze alone could send a chill down my spine in the banquet hall. Now she knelt on the grayish stone floor, her long silver hair scattered across the ground. The glow of the moonstone illuminated her face, making her cold, aloof features appear almost translucent. Kalian's sword remained sheathed. His hand still rested on the hilt, his knuckles slowly returning from a pallid white to their normal hue. Not a sign of relaxation, but of heightened vigilance. He had not drawn his sword, even when facing the elder accompanied by 30 guards. Yet here, with this woman kneeling alone before him, he gripped the hilt even tighter. "Confess!" His voice was not loud, but every word cut like a blade against a whetstone. "Confess to what?" Leonora raised her head. Her eyes, the color of a winter night, met Kalian's gaze directly. No flinching, no trembling, like two frozen lakes. 16 years ago, the Silver Wolf clan staged a coup against the late king. The mastermind was my grandfather, Fane the very elder, now leading the troops besieging the palace gates. But it was my mother who handed over the information about the coup. She paused for a moment, as if waiting for the full weight of those words to sink in. My mother was not one of the Silver Wolves. She was the daughter of a chieftain from a small northern tribe, and she was ostracized from the moment she married into the Silver Wolf clan. She discovered the entire coup plan in my grandfather's study. The list of participants, the time of the assassination, and the formula for refining the silver marrow poison. She copied everything onto a sheet of parchment and bribed a member of a merchant caravan to smuggle it into the palace. The reason the late king was able to survive so long after being poisoned, mount a counterattack, and force the Silver Wolf clan to sign a blood oath was precisely because he received that intelligence in advance. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers unconsciously clenched the fabric of my sleeve. "And what happened to your mother afterward?" "She was discovered." Leonora's voice was eerily calm, as if she were recounting an event that had nothing to do with her. "After the coup failed, my grandfather tracked her down. She was executed by having her silver marrow stripped away." "Yes, just like your mother." She finally turned her gaze toward me. In those eyes, the color of a winter night, lay some deep, long-suppressed emotion. "Your mother wasn't the only silver wolf to have her silver marrow stripped. She was the second. The first was my mother. The only difference is, your mother survived and gave birth to you. My mother bit her tongue and killed herself the very night her silver marrow was stripped." My hand slipped from my sleeve, my knuckles frozen mid-air. Leonora turned her gaze back to Kalian. Her voice remained steady, but a faint crack began to appear in the trailing notes. "For years before his death, your father was investigating internal traitors. He couldn't have been unaware that my mother had passed on intelligence. But he never made it public, nor did he grant my mother any posthumous honors, because he knew that once it came out, I would be purged by the Silver Wolf clan as the descendant of a traitor. Just like you, Kieran. In a sense, we are kindred spirits." Kalian's Adam's apple bobbed. His grip on the hilt of his sword loosened, and his fingers dropped. But he did not step closer to her. Is this the confession you were talking about? This is just the background. Leonora took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling visibly. The confession I'm making is, last night, I deliberately let her into the banquet hall. I was stunned. You weren't originally the king's cup changer. Leonora stood up, the moonstone in her hand swaying slightly, casting a flickering patch of light on the floor. At last night's banquet, according to protocol, the daughter of the master of the cup was supposed to be responsible for changing the cups, a ceremonial role reserved for unmarried noblewomen. But yesterday at noon, I suddenly suggested to the master of the cup that we choose a human servant of the lowest rank to perform this duty. I said it was to demonstrate the royal family's benevolence toward all servants. The master of the cup dared not defy the Silver Wolf family's request, so he chose you, the only human maid working in the wine cellar. Her gaze met mine, and I know what will happen to you. Not everything. I don't know the specifics, but I know you are no ordinary person, because ever since I was a child, I've heard my grandfather mention that child in the servants' quarters, at least 7 times. Every time he got drunk, he'd mutter to himself saying, "That bomb is bound to go off sooner or later," or "That bastard left behind by the late king will cause trouble sooner or later." He even sent people to investigate the servant camp. But your records were burned 10 years ago, and there have been 3 changes in management since then. He found nothing. So he always assumed you were just an ordinary bastard, not worth making a big fuss over. She took a step forward. Carrion's body shifted slightly, but he did not stop her. Until last month, the prophecy stone began to glow. Leonora's tone suddenly grew heavy, like a stone sinking into deep water. The Silver Wolf clan's prophecy stone is a sacred relic left by our ancestors, connected to the altar of the moon goddess. During the first full moon last month, it suddenly lit up, for the first time in 300 years. Several ancient characters appeared on its surface. Daughter of the servant, bathed in the blood moon, eyes of silver and gold. Then yesterday was the second full moon last night. My grandfather went mad with urgency, demanding to know if she was truly the chosen one, and insisting that you must subdue her before the royal family finds her. She stopped in her tracks. Only a few steps separated the 3 of us. The moonstone's glow stretched our shadows long and tangled together, so I had no other choice. Her voice finally lost its calm. A crack widened, revealing an exhaustion beneath it that bordered on collapse. If I did nothing, grandfather would take matters into his own hands. He'd send shadow wolves to the servant camp, drag you back to Silver Wolf Castle, and extract your marrow to strip your mark. And she looked at me, something glinting faintly in her eyes, not tears, but the silver sheen that appears in a wolf's pupils when they're overcome with emotion. I watched my mother die on the execution platform, where they extracted her silver marrow. I'll never forget that scream for the rest of my life. I don't want to hear it again. The morning light streaming down from the temple dome grew brighter and brighter, illuminating the words I'd carved into the altar with my fingernails with increasing clarity. The sound of water droplets falling from the stone walls, one after another, was like the temple's own heartbeat. "So you had me go into the banquet hall." I finally spoke, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "so that Kieran would find me, so he'd recognize me as the chosen one, so he'd protect me. By exposing me to hundreds of nobles, you were forcing him to take a stand, forcing him to establish a bond with me in front of everyone, so that when your grandfather comes for me, he'll have to get past the royal family first." Leonora didn't deny it. "But you ruined yourself in the process," I said. "Everyone thought you'd become queen. You handed your fiancé's chosen one right to him on a silver platter." The corner of her mouth twitched, not a smile, but something heavier than a smile. Do you think I wanted to be queen? She placed the moonstone on the edge of the altar, her hands hanging at her sides, her long silver hair appearing almost translucent in the morning light. From the age of 3, my grandfather whispered in my ear every day, "You are the most perfect woman of the Silver Wolf clan. You will become queen. You will bear an heir to the throne with the blood of the Silver Wolf for our clan." Everything I wore, everything I learned, everyone I met, every word I spoke, it was all to ensure that Kieran would choose me. I am not a person. I am the Silver Wolf clan's most valuable pawn. She turned to Kieran, her expression shifting. Gone was the composure of her earlier narration, replaced by a weariness that had been buried for many, many years and had finally resurfaced. "You've never truly seen me, have you? At my 16th birthday ceremony, when you danced the first dance with me, you spent the entire time looking out the window. On that hunting trip when I turned 20, I deliberately fell from my horse, and you had a guard help me up while you continued chasing the prey. You think I didn't know? I've known since I was 12 that your scent response to me was only half. If an alpha produces only a half response to an omega's pheromones, it means that person can never be his true mate. So all these years, it wasn't that I insisted on clinging to you. It was my grandfather who forced me to keep up the act." A flicker of emotion finally crossed Kieran's eyes. It wasn't moved, nor was it guilt, but rather a sense of reevaluation, as if looking at a painting that had hung for centuries and suddenly discovering another canvas hidden behind the frame. None of that matters now. Leonora withdrew her gaze, walked back to the altar, and placed a hand on the stone carving along its edge. "What matters is that last night's coronation banquet was, in fact, a coup that the Silver Wolf clan had been planning for 3 months. You knocked over that cup of wine. You revealed your true nature. Kalian activated the silver moon mark on the spot. None of this was part of the plan. Grandfather's original plan was to proclaim Leonora queen at the coronation banquet. If Kieran refused, they would launch a coup on the spot, accusing him of insulting the Silver Wolf clan. 30 guards were already lying in wait in the side hall, and the elders had prepared the blood oath documents. The moment Kieran uttered a single no, the entire banquet hall would have turned into a battlefield. A chill ran down my spine. But Kieran didn't say no. He didn't even acknowledge me. He just grabbed that human attendant who'd spilled the wine and walked off. Leonora's lips twitched again, this time with genuine self-mockery. The plan fell apart. The chosen one had appeared, and it wasn't Leonora. The guards didn't know what to do, and the elders began shifting blame onto one another. To regain control of the situation, Grandfather Fien had no choice but to change the plan on the spot, shifting from a coup to an arrest. That's why he'd only brought 30 guards to the palace gates, instead of 300. He wasn't ready yet, but next time it won't be this simple. Kalian sheathed his sword. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed briefly through the temple before fading into silence. He walked up to Leonora and looked down at her, towering over her by nearly a head, his shoulders so broad they truly seemed capable of blocking a doorway. Morning light streamed in from behind him, casting the same golden glow upon both their silhouettes. "You didn't come here today just to confess and negotiate." His voice regained its usual calm rhythm. "You have conditions." "Yes." Leonora did not avert her gaze. "I want to go with you." After she spoke, the temple fell silent for several seconds. "To Broken Moon Cliff," she continued, her tone growing more resolute. "I know that's where you're going, because if you want to break the contract made 300 years ago, the only way is to find the first laurel tree planted by the moon goddess herself. That tree isn't in the laurel grove on the surface of Broken Moon Cliff. It's hidden inside the cliff face, in a cave that can only be opened by the bloodline of the Silver Wolf clan. You need me." She raised her wrist and drew a line across her palm with her fingernail. A drop of blood seeped out and fell onto the altar. The runes on the altar instantly absorbed her blood, turning silver red, a color more vivid than the one Kalian had activated earlier. "I'm not a pure-blooded silver wolf," she said, her voice carrying a self-destructive resolve. "My mother was a human who married into the clan, so I'm only half silver wolf. But that half is just enough to open that cave, and I want only one thing in return." She looked at Kieran's face, then turned to me. "Once this is done, help me destroy the Silver Wolf clan. Not by killing them all, but by dismantling the council, abolish the purity of blood. Make sure my grandfather and his old fools can never again use so-called bloodlines to decide anyone's fate. Let women like my mother, women like your mother who had her marrow drained, and all silver wolves who don't meet their standards, no longer be treated as pawns to be executed at will." As she uttered the final word, she fell silent, her lower lip trembling slightly. The first genuine crack appeared in that face, which had remained as cold as an ice sculpture, not a sign of collapse, but of throwing caution to the wind. It was a woman who had been suppressed for over 20 years, laying all her cards on the table for the very first time. Kalian remained silent for a long time, long enough for the morning light to shift from the crack in the dome to the very center of the altar, long enough for 12 drops of water to fall from the stone wall. Then he reached out, that hand which had just moments ago rested on his sword hilt, ready to kill at any moment, and placed it on Leonora's shoulder. "I agree." 4 words. No hesitation, no conditions. Like a knife, cleanly severing a rope. "But there is one condition." He withdrew his hand, took a step back, and once again became the cold, hard wolf king. "Before we reach Broken Moon Cliff, all past grievances between you and us are forgiven. But if you show any sign of betrayal along the way, even if it's just sending an encrypted message behind our backs, I won't give you a chance to explain." Leonora said nothing. She simply crouched down and drew a dagger from the leg of her boot. It was an exquisite weapon, silver hilt, curved blade, the blade engraved with the Silver Wolf clan's crest. She placed the dagger on the altar, then unfastened a silver chain from around her neck, from which hung a thumb-sized communication stone, a magical artifact used by the Wolf clan for long-distance communication. "My personal weapon and the Silver Wolf clan's communication stone." She stood up and looked into Kalian's eyes. "From this moment on, I have no connection to Silver Wolf Keep." Kalian picked up the communication stone and clenched it in his palm. He tightened his fingers, and when he opened his hand again, the stone had turned into a pile of silver powder trickling through his fingers. "Let's go," he said. "It's already dawn. The Silver Wolf Sentinels will discover my departure from the palace within an hour. We must leave the city before then." He turned toward another exit of the temple, a direction different from the secret passage we'd come through, narrower and darker, with glowing moss creeping up the stone walls. He took a few steps, then looked back at me. "Stay close." I pulled my cloak tighter around me and followed. As I passed Leonora, she suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip wasn't tight, her hand was cold, and her fingertips trembled slightly. "There's one thing I didn't mention earlier." Her voice was hushed so low that only the two of us could hear it. "The reason your mother escaped execution all those years ago and was hidden in the servants' quarters, it wasn't because of the late king's arrangement. It was my mother. When she handed over the coup plans, she also brought out the only ancient text within the Silver Wolf clan regarding how the bloodline of the Chosen One can be concealed within a human body, and gave it to the late king. That is why he knew how to hide your mother. It wasn't my father's mercy, nor my grandfather's leniency. It was my mother. Among the last few things she did before her marrow was drained, she wrote this down in the letter she left for me." Her fingers slipped from my wrist. So I'm helping you, not to atone, nor to betray the silver wolves. She paused, a flicker of light passing through her winter night eyes before it vanished. I'm just finishing what my mother left undone. Then she let go of my hand, turned, and walked over to Kalian, her long silver hair tracing an arc in the morning light. I stood in the center of the temple, watching the backs of the two figures ahead, one with dark hair and broad shoulders, the other with silver hair and a slender frame. Walking side by side and arm's length apart, they resembled two parallel lines that would never intersect, yet were forcibly drawn together by a single goal. The moonstone on the altar still glowed. I walked over, picked it up, and clenched it in my palm. The stone was warm, like holding a person's pulse. My gaze fell on the words inscribed at the edge of the altar. "Daughter, if you ever come here, trust no one, except the one who bleeds for you." I looked up at Kalian ahead of me. On his back, the blood stains at the edges of the tears in his uniform had dried to a dark red. He had bled more than once since last night, and I hadn't even properly thanked him once. But Mother, when you said trust no one, did that include the eldest daughter of the Silver Wolves who crushed the communication stone right before my eyes? I tucked the moonstone into the pocket of my cloak and hurried after him. At the other end of the secret passage lay an abandoned sentry post, hidden within a thicket of thorns at the base of the royal city's northern wall. By the time we emerged, it was broad daylight. Grayish, white clouds hung low, and a wind blew in from the north, carrying the scent of frost and pine resin. The watchtowers on the city walls grew smaller behind us, while the road ahead was hidden among rolling gray hills. Kalian led the way, his sword still sheathed, but its belt buckle undone. Leonora walked in the middle, her silver hair still blindingly bright in the grayish light of day. I brought up the rear. The thin-soled shoes of a page had been torn by the thorns, my toes poking through the slits as I stepped on the frozen ground, a sharp stinging pain with every step. But I have no intention of saying so. The road is still too long, Broken Moon Cliff still too far away, and the next blood moon's glow hangs over us like a sword poised to fall. Complaining is useless. Crying out in pain won't get anyone to carry you. Any child raised in the servants' camp knows this well. I press my cracked soles firmly into the ground, pull my cloak tighter, and match my pace to the two ahead of me. The wind blew in from the north, carrying a faint, bitter-sweet scent. It was faint, distant, and fleeting, but the back of my neck sensed it. The birthmark was growing slightly warm, as if responding to some incredibly distant call. Laurel blossoms. In that direction. A very, very distant direction. The gravel road at the foot of the mountain came to an abrupt end after just an hour. It wasn't the kind of blockage caused by falling rocks. The path itself had vanished. The mountainside ahead looked as if it had been cleaved by a giant axe, leaving behind a nearly vertical cliff face. The cliff was devoid of vegetation, consisting only of layer upon layer of grayish, white rock, its surface covered with a thin layer of ice that glinted with a cold, faint light in the sunlight, filtering through the gaps in the clouds. The only way up was to climb a naturally formed crevice, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through sideways, with icicles hanging from the rock walls on either side, emitting a crisp cracking sound at the slightest touch. Kalian paused a step before the crevice, looked up at the mist-shrouded mountain wall for a moment, then exhaled softly, white wisps of mist dissipating rapidly in the cold air. "I'll go first. Leonora will follow. You'll be in the middle with someone in front and behind you." He turned to look at me. His dark golden eyes had dimmed slightly, and the black veins around his eye sockets had spread from his cheekbones to the edge of his jaw, but his voice remained as steady as a slab of iron. "Don't look down. Don't touch the icicles. The sound of an icicle falling carries a long way." I nodded. The climb took about an hour. The space within the crevice was extremely narrow. My back and chest pressed against the bone, chilling rock face, and every step upward required twisting my body into strange angles. My boots were too big, they kept slipping on the protruding edges of the rock. Cold mist poured down from above, seeping into my collar and cuffs, mixing with sweat and melted ice water until my lips went numb with the cold. Kalian climbed swiftly. He practically glided silently through the crevice, his wolf claws carving shallow indentations into the ice, his body as light as if he weren't a man suffering the backlash of a blood oath. But I noticed that he would pause every 10 steps or so, not to rest, but to wait for an extremely brief moment, for a wave of dizziness to pass. In that instant, his hands would tighten slightly, his fingers digging into the ice within the crevices, his knuckles turning white. Then, he would continue climbing upward, his movements showing no abnormality other than the brief pause. He had no intention of letting anyone see him at his weakest. Leonora was behind me, never urging me on or saying a word the entire way. Only once did my right foot miss its footing, sending me sliding back half a foot as my knee struck the rock face with a dull thud. Her hand reached up from below to support the sole of my foot, holding me steady until I regained my footing before withdrawing. I looked down at her. She merely lifted her chin to signal that I should continue. There was not a single superfluous expression on her face. Once we passed through the crevice, the landscape suddenly opened up. We stood on a high mountain plateau, covered in thick snow that sank past our ankles with every step. All around us were jagged white rocks, twisted into shapes as if twisted by some immense force. With no shelter from the wind here, it howled in from the north, whipping up snowflakes from the ground that stung our faces like fine sandpaper. The sky remained a murky gray. It was impossible to tell whether it was morning or afternoon. The iron-gray dome of clouds hung low, as if one could almost touch it with a finger. Occasionally, a sliver of brighter light would slip through a gap in the clouds, illuminating a distant ridge before being swallowed up again. "We'll spend the night in the cave at the edge of the plateau," Kalian said, walking ahead, his voice broken by the wind. "Tomorrow, once we cross the ridge ahead, we'll officially enter the territory of the White Skeleton Clan. Once we're there, I may no longer be able to maintain my wolf form." His tone was matter of fact, but the weight of those words left a heavy lump in my chest. I quickened my pace to catch up to him and turned my head to look at his face. The contours of his profile appeared sharper than usual in the cold gray light of the sky. The hollows beneath his cheekbones were deeper, and the color of his lips was 2 shades paler than last night. We'd been walking in his boots for 4 days. During those 4 days, his partial shapeshift had barely lifted. His feet remained in wolf claw form, and his arms would partially shift whenever he needed to scout or fight. Each time he'd say it wasn't draining him much, each time he'd say he could hold on. But the black veins spreading like a spiderweb around his eyes couldn't be deceived. They were expanding bit by bit, like black moss growing slowly beneath his skin. The backlash of the blood oath. Leonora stepped up from his other side, voicing the words I dared not speak. "Every time you draw upon the power of the blood oath, including partial beast transformation, the backlash intensifies. Once we enter the White Skeleton Clan's territory, if we encounter people who are hostile toward us, you'll have no choice but to fight. Will you be able to hold out then?" She didn't use a questioning tone. She spoke with the cool detachment of a woman, skilled in calculation, assessing our capabilities. Kalian turned his head to glance at her. "Even if I can't hold out, I'll have to. We're less than 3 days' journey from Broken Moon Cliff. At our current pace, we'll reach it before nightfall the day after tomorrow. Once we get to Broken Moon Cliff and find that laurel tree, there might be a way to break the contract. Until then, how long my body can hold out doesn't matter. What matters is getting her there safely." Her. Of course, that meant me. He didn't wait for Leonora's reply, striding toward the faintly visible cave entrance at the edge of the plateau. The cave wasn't large, but it was big enough for 3 people to shelter in. Traces of ancient murals remained on the walls. The colors had faded to near invisibility, leaving only faint outlines of deer and the moon. Inside lay a pile of grayish, white old ashes. Simone had once lit a fire here. Kalian crouched down to feel the ashes' temperature, then shook his head. It's cold. It's been at least several months. Leonora cast a simple warning spell at the entrance, drawing an arc with moonstone powder. She explained that the line wouldn't stop anyone from entering, but as long as a living creature stepped on it, the moonstone would glow faintly as a warning. After finishing, she carefully tucked the remaining powder into her sleeve, a gesture that betrayed the frugality of someone accustomed to chronic scarcity. We built a small fire inside the cave. The fuel was dry shrub branches that Kalian had gathered from outside. They produced a lot of smoke but very little flame. Yet at least they raised the temperature inside the cave from freezing to death to barely survivable. The 3 of us sat around the fire, each tending to our own wounds. Leonora had a fresh wound on the palm of her left hand, a cut from an icicle when she'd braced herself against a rock crevice to support my foot. She rinsed it with clean water from her water skin, then pulled the silver needle from her sleeve, heated it over the fire, and stitched the wound directly. The entire process was silent. She didn't even wince. As the needle pierced the skin, her fingers were as steady as if she were embroidering, though her lips pressed into an even thinner line. I watched from the side, my palms slightly sweaty. I'd seen people stitch wounds in the slave camp too. The butcher uncle who'd cut his palm on a boning knife, with no medicine they'd used a sewing needle dipped in salt water to stitch it up. But that was in the camp, where there was wine to drink and walls to lean against. The eldest daughter of the Silver Wolf clan, in a cave out in the wilderness, expressionlessly sewing her own palm with a silver needle. This scene shattered yet another layer of my understanding of Leonora. Kalian sat across from the fire, sharpening his sword with a whetstone. That sword hadn't been used since we left the royal city. Leonora had subdued the shadow wolf, and we hadn't encountered any other enemies along the way. Yet he still sharpened it every day, not because the blade had grown dull, but because the act of sharpening itself allowed him to maintain a certain rhythm. The sound of grit scraping against metal echoed rhythmically in the cramped cave, rising and falling like some ancient heartbeat. On the 3rd pass, his hand suddenly froze. The blade came to a halt on the whetstone. His fingers clenched the hilt so tightly. His knuckles turned white. His eyes didn't close. It wasn't dizziness. His pupils were contracting, shrinking from their normal round shape into an extremely thin vertical line, then suddenly dilating only to contract again. That fluctuation lasted about 3 seconds before returning to normal. He gasped for air as if he'd been pulled from deep water, a fine sheen of cold sweat beating on his forehead. Kalian. I stood up. I'm fine. He waved his hand, his voice hoarser than it had been a few seconds ago. Just intermittent fluctuations from the backlash. It'll pass in a moment. This isn't fine. Your pupils just went haywire. Leonora set down the silver needle, her expression growing even more serious than when she'd been stitching the wound. She stood up, walked over to Kalian, crouched down, and reached toward the side of his neck. Kalian instinctively turned his head away, but she blocked his hand with a swift, decisive motion, like an experienced military medic dealing with an uncooperative casualty. "Let me see," she said, pressing her fingers against his neck and feeling for a moment. Then her brow furrowed. "Your heart rate is at least a third slower than a normal werewolf's. The concentration of silver essence in your blood is dropping. I can smell it. Your body is shutting off blood flow to non-essential functions. First the skin and limbs, then the senses, and finally," she paused, withdrew her hand, and met his gaze with eyes the color of a winter night. "Finally, the heart. If the blood oath's backlash continues to worsen, you have 2 days at most. After 2 days, your heart will stop beating due to lack of blood supply." Kalian didn't respond to her words. He lifted the sword from the whetstone, sheathed it, and picked up the water skin by the fire to take a sip. The entire sequence of movements was deliberate and measured, as if he were using the actions themselves to deny the gravity of the diagnosis she just delivered. Then take me to Broken Moon Cliff within those 2 days. He wiped the frost from the scabbard with a rag without looking up. Isn't that what you need too? Leonora watched him for a long time. The firelight danced across her face, revealing a certain fragility beneath her usually cold, hard features. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. When she spoke again, her tone had returned to its usual calm, detached state. Whether you want to hear it or not, I must tell you, in your current condition, if we encounter white-bone warriors while crossing the ridge tomorrow, you won't last even a minute in battle. And I can't protect both of you at the same time. Then you protect her. Carrion's eyes lifted from the scabbard and fixed on Leonora. I'll hold them off, you take her away. The words echoed in the cramped cave, like a stone striking ice. A long silence hung in the air. The fire crackled, and the warning lights at the cave entrance glowed with a faint silver light in the dimness. Number, I heard myself say. Carrion turned to look at me. His brow slightly furrowed. Number, I repeated, standing up and walking to the other side of the fire, then crouching down in front of him. For the first time, our eyes were completely level. I crouched, he sat, our gazes locked, less than an arm's length apart. You said you'd give me one last chance to back out. Now I'm giving it back to you. You can turn back, return to the royal city, return to the temple, return to the altar before the blood oath's backlash kills you. The altar's seal will restore you. Then you can figure something else out, find someone else. There is no one else. He cut me off. His voice was soft, but it cut through the air like a blade slicing through silk, exquisitely light and razor. Sharp. There is only one chosen one. There is only one Alpha to protect you, and there is only one person in the prophecy who can break this 300-year stalemate. His eyes were locked on me. Those pupils, fading to gray, glowed even brighter in the firelight, as if he were concentrating all his remaining energy into his gaze. As for escorting you, there was never an alternative from the very beginning. Not because I'm so noble, nor because I don't know I'm nearly at my limit, but because no one else could do this, because they aren't you, and they aren't me. He raised his hand. It was trembling, not from fear, not from exhaustion, but because the backlash of the blood oath was stripping him of control over his muscles. Yet despite the tremor, his hand rose and rested on my shoulder, the touch gentle. You think I'm protecting you for the sake of the prophecy. He suddenly smiled, a faint curve tugging at the corners of his mouth, so faint it barely qualified as a smile. The prophecy is etched into my mind. I can recite every line by heart. The blood of destiny tears the crown. The forgotten servant bears the newborn flower, whether for true love or for bones. I've been reciting these lines since I was 16, for 10 years now. Over those 10 years, I've taken them apart, put them back together, overturned them, and rebuilt them, repeatedly weighing every possible interpretation. So when I first protected you, it was indeed the prophecy's design. It was a helpless act, bound by fate. He paused. A low sound escaped his throat, like a self-deprecating chuckle. But in the gray thornwood, when you saw those dead trees, your first reaction wasn't fear. You spoke of Aunt Gray sneaking bits of meat rind into your meals while she was cutting up the meat. You remembered a birthmark behind an old cook's left ear. You didn't grieve for a burning forest. You grieved for a specific person. In that moment, I suddenly realized that all the suffering you've endured over these 16 years, the things I, as Wolf King, should have prevented but failed to, they haven't made you cold-hearted. Instead, they've made you cherish every person who's been kind to you all the more. This has nothing to do with the prophecy, nothing to do with the chosen one, and nothing to do with whose blood runs through your veins. His fingers moved from my shoulder, and rested lightly on the back of my neck, not pressing down, but his fingertips brushing ever so gently over the silver crescent birthmark. You are you. You are exactly the kind of person I'd fight to the death to protect. The fire in the cave flickered twice, then dimmed. The wood had nearly burned out, leaving only a few glowing embers flickering in the ashes. I crouched before Kieran, the warmth of his fingertips still lingering on the skin of my shoulder. Something was lodged in my throat, choking me. I wanted to say something, but thank you felt too shallow. I understand too clumsy, and I won't let you die, too much like an empty promise. So I said nothing. I reached out and took the hand he'd placed on my shoulder, our hands clasped in the dim glow of the embers. His fingers were a full knuckle longer than mine, his web between thumb and index finger calloused from years of gripping a sword, his palm burning hot, yet his fingertips ice cold. It was a sign that the backlash of the blood oath was draining the blood supply from the tips of his limbs. I clasped his hand tightly, pressing my palm against his, hoping to transfer some of my warmth to him. Even just a little. He didn't pull his hand away. After what felt like a long time, or perhaps just a moment, he gently withdrew his hand from mine. Then he stood up, walked to the cave entrance, and turned his back to Leonora and me. The outline of his shoulders in the dim light resembled a silent rock. We'll cross the ridge tomorrow. You both get some rest. The next day, as we crossed the ridge, the weather grew even worse. It wasn't a blizzard, it was fog. A white fog as thick as solid matter poured down from the mountaintop, reducing visibility to less than 10 paces. The snow beneath our feet was soaked by the mist, making it wet and slippery. Every step felt like treading on oiled stone. Kalian led the way, but he could no longer maintain his wolf claw form. His feet had returned to human shape, clad in makeshift shoes, bound together with vines and rags. Leonora walked behind me, not uttering a single sound the entire way, but her gaze would sweep over Kalian's back every few seconds, and the fingers holding the moonstone would tighten slightly. When we reached the highest point of the ridge, the fog suddenly cleared. It wasn't blown away by the wind. It was as if a giant curtain had been violently pulled aside by a hand. A sea of clouds churned beneath our feet, and beneath the distant pale blue sky, the full outline of Broken Moon Cliff came into view. The mountain was far more massive and steep than I had imagined from afar. Its body consisted of nearly vertical white cliffs, their faces etched with countless deep gullies by the wind, resembling an ancient silent face from a distance. And atop the cliff, there was a patch of an almost unreal silvery green, a grove of laurel trees. Even from this distance, I could see the cool silvery glow reflected from the tree crowns as they billowed in the wind. At that moment, the back of my neck suddenly grew hot. It wasn't the faint warmth I'd felt before, but a searing heat, as if someone had pressed a red-hot coal against my birthmark. The scent of laurel flowers washed over me, so intense it seemed almost tangible. It wasn't a wisp of fragrance, but a vast sea of scent surging from the direction of Broken Moon Cliff, flooding my nostrils, my throat, lungs. I instinctively covered the back of my neck with my hand. My fingers touched the birthmark, and the heat was so intense I nearly cried out. At the same time, something stirred within me. It wasn't my bones, nor my muscles, but something deeper, something I had never felt before. It was as if an instinct sealed away for 16 years was awakening. My gums tingled, and a strange itch ran beneath my fingernails, as if something were trying to grow out from beneath my skin. A subtle shift occurred at the edges of my vision. I could see details farther away, make out the texture of the wind-eroded gullies on the cliff face of Broken Moon Cliff, and discern the silvery green edges of every single leaf in the laurel grove. I could even see a herd of white goats leaping along the rock face several hundred feet below the ridge, each step they took leaving a clear echo in my ears. Kalian turned to look at me. His nostrils flared slightly, his pupils dilated. He had smelled it too. Not only had he smelled it, but he had seen the changes taking place within me. "Your eyes," he said, a note of suppressed astonishment in his voice. "Their color is changing." I fished Leonora's moonstone out of my cloak pocket and studied my face in its reflection. The face mirrored in the stone was still mine, 16 years old, gaunt, with 2 patches of purplish, red on my cheekbones from the cold wind. But my eyes were no longer the color I knew. My originally dark brown irises were spreading outward from the center in a layer of extremely pale silver. Gold, like a drop of milk falling into strong tea, slowly diffusing outward. Silver, gold, exactly like those ancient characters that had appeared on the prophecy stone in the temple. The bloodline of the chosen one is fully awakening. Leonora stepped up behind me, looking into my eyes with an expression that grew incredibly complex, a mix of awe, concern, and a deeper compassion, as if she had already seen the outcome. What awakened at the banquet was merely the mark itself, causing your birthmark to emit the scent of laurel, so the Alpha could recognize you. But now that we are drawing closer to the first laurel tree, the bond between you and the moon goddess is strengthening. Your body is preparing to bear the goddess's power. When both your eyes have fully turned silver, gold, it will signify that your bloodline has fully awakened. At that point, you will be ready to be marked. She paused and turned to look at Kieran. The next words were directed at him, and at that moment, whoever marks you will trigger the price of forbidden love. The bloodline curse and the goddess's power will take effect simultaneously within him. The power will flood his body while the curse will tear his mind apart. Do you think you can hold out for another 2 days? If she completes her bloodline awakening, atop Broken Moon Cliff, and you mark her, you might not even last 2 hours. Kalian looked into my eyes and was silent for a few seconds. The mist swirled along both sides of the ridge, scattering and reassembling his silhouette. His face had turned so pale it was nearly translucent, and the black veins around his eyes had spread to the edges of his lips. But those fading pupils still glowed like 2 pieces of nearly burnt out charcoal. "So we're not going to our deaths," he said, his voice soft but carried far by the mountain wind. "We're going to break this damned curse, to awaken her bloodline, but it will be I who ends the deadly stalemate between the marker and the marked." He turned and continued walking toward the other side of the ridge, his back silhouetted against the mist, and the light of day looked both exceptionally lonely and exceptionally resolute. Once we passed the ridge, we entered the territory of the White Skeleton clan. The mountains here displayed a peculiar terraced landscape. Natural limestone platforms cascaded down the slopes in layers, each strewn with rubble and stunted shrubs. Mist gathered in the valley, refusing to disperse, bathed in the faint afternoon light. It shimmered with a pearlescent sheen. The white bone people emerged from the mist. There were no footsteps, no warning cries, not even a breath as loud as a wild hare's. Only a few white shadows suddenly appeared in the fog. They wore undyed woolen cloaks, their hair a shade between gray and white, skin so pale it was nearly transparent, with only a faint reddish scar on their cheekbones and noses, worn smooth by the mountain winds. In their hands, they held bone spears. The tips had no metal, yet were honed sharper than a knife. Kalian stopped in his tracks and raised a hand, palm facing forward. "We are merely passing through. Our destination is Broken Moon Cliff. We will not remain in the White Skeleton clan's territory for more than a day." He did not use the title of Wolf King, nor any royal title. In the presence of this tribe, which had been driven out of Wolf Clan civilization 60 years ago, any title would only provoke more hostility rather than awe. The White Skeleton clan warriors did not lower their spears. Leading them was a middle-aged woman with her hair braided into many thin plaits, each ending with a small white stone. Her eyes were pale gray, like frozen lake water. She stared at Kalian for a long time, then spoke, her voice rough and hoarse, like two pieces of grit grinding against each other. Your scent royal, black gold bloodline, but your eyes are fading. The blood oath has turned against you, a dying wolf king accompanied by two women heading for Broken Moon Cliff. She tilted her head slightly, the white stones on her braids clinking together with a soft tinkling sound. You are going to find the first laurel tree. It was not a question. Kalian did not deny it. He lowered his raised right hand. His other hand remained on the hilt of his sword, but his knuckles were not clenched. He was using the subtlest of body language to convey a message to the White Bone clan. I don't want to fight, but I won't go down without a struggle. Broken Moon Cliff is forbidden territory of the Silver Wolf clan. The White Bone woman continued, her gray eyes sweeping from Kalian to Leonora, lingering particularly long on her silver-white hair. That woman is of Silver Wolf blood. You know what the Silver Wolves did to us. Massacres, expulsions, village burnings. 60 years ago, they set our valley ablaze, forcing us to retreat to the most desolate reaches of the Bone Mountains. Over those 60 years, 3 generations of us have perished, each generation with members freezing to death, starving to death, or being hunted down by the Silver Wolves hunters, killed for their marrow. And you, she turned the tip of her spear toward Leonora. Your grandfather, Fiend, personally led a raid into the mountains 20 years ago and burned our last medicinal field. That winter we lost a third of our clan. Leonora did not step back, nor did she offer a defense. She stood her ground, her long silver hair blowing in the wind, her expression set in a stiff line. Then she did something that took everyone by surprise. She held out her hand, exposing the freshly stitched wound in the palm of her left hand. The wound was still fresh, the stitches crooked, and a pale red liquid seeped from the edges of the scab. I cannot deny what my grandfather did, she said, her voice steady but tightening at the end. His blood runs through my veins, but I did not come here to excuse him. I did not bring an army nor hunters. I brought only myself, the woman beside me. She, too, carries the blood of the Silver Wolves. Yet the Silver Wolf clan stripped her mother of her silver marrow and cast her into the slave camp to die. Even within the Silver Wolf bloodline, there are perpetrators and victims, just as not all of the White Bone clan are innocent. The White Bone woman narrowed her eyes. The tip of her spear did not move, but it did not advance any further either. That moonstone, in your arms, hand it over. Leonora was silent for a few seconds, then retrieved the moonstone from inside her cloak, cradling it in both hands as she handed it over. The White Bone woman took it, weighed the stone in her palm, and then did something that shocked us all. She pressed the moonstone to her forehead, closed her eyes, and remained silent for a moment. When she opened them again, her pale gray eyes were filled with an incredibly complex emotion. Not anger, not hatred, but a deeper sorrow that spanned an immense span of time. This stone belonged to my aunt, she said, her voice suddenly softening, as if she were speaking to herself. 60 years ago, my aunt was captured by an officer of the Silver Wolf clan and made a slave. She never returned, but that moonstone she carried with her from childhood. My grandmother said it was engraved with a flying bird. My aunt carved it herself when she was 14. She turned the moonstone over and ran her finger over a nearly worn, away engraving on its underside, a small, crudely drawn pattern of a flying bird. It was no bigger than a thumbnail. One would never notice it without looking closely, but it was definitely there. Leonora's lips parted slightly, then pressed together tightly. She stared at the stone, the color draining from her face. This moonstone had been passed down through generations of her Silver Wolf clan. She didn't know its origin, or perhaps no one had ever told her. What is your name? The white skeleton woman asked Leonora, her tone no longer as sharp as before. Leonora. Leonora, the white skeleton woman repeated, then nodded. The fact that you were able to retrieve the stone, albeit 60 years late, at least proves you aren't completely ignorant. I can show you the way to Broken Mooncliff, but there is one condition." Her gaze shifted to me. Those pale gray eyes scanned me from head to toe, pausing at the nape of my neck, where the birthmark was. She must have sensed something because her expression suddenly changed, as if she had glimpsed something ancient, something of a legendary nature. "You, come here." I glanced at Kalian. He gave a slight nod, his hand still resting on the hilt of his sword. I walked over to stand before the white bone woman. She wasn't much taller than me, but her frame was broad, her shoulders nearly as wide as a male hunter's. She had a distinctive scent, not floral, not bloody, but a mixture of dried herbs and frozen earth, with a hint of aged smoke. She placed her hand on the back of my neck, through the fabric of my cloak. Her palm covered the burning birthmark exactly. Then she jerked her hand back, a flash of horror crossing her eyes. Silver, gold eyes, blood of 2 veins. The silver moon birthmark, you are the child of the prophecy. The one foretold in the goddess's covenant 300 years ago. She took a step back, then suddenly bent at the waist, bowing to me in the manner unique to the White Bone clan. Not an act of submission, but a ritual of reverence, ancient and solemn. The White Bone clan has an ancient oral prophecy, distinct from the prophecies of your royal line. We do not speak of true love or withered bones. We say, when the servant of the forgotten sets foot upon the land of bones under the crimson moon, the ancient covenant shall be torn asunder. The White Bone clan has guarded this prophecy for generations, for we believe this rift will not only end the stalemate between the royal house and the silver wolves, but also bring an end to our 60 years of suffering. She straightened her back and turned to Kalian, her gaze becoming direct and serious. "I will send 2 people to guide you along the animal trail to Broken Mooncliff. But you must promise me, if you truly break the 300-year-old pact and end the blood feud between the royal house and the Silver Wolf clan, then the White Skeleton clan must also be included in the new order. We ask for no territory, no compensation, only that we no longer be treated as wild werewolves to be hunted at will. We need an oath written on a laurel branch." Kalian stepped forward, his right hand sliding from the hilt of his sword, fingers splayed, palm facing upward, the oldest and most solemn gesture of commitment among the wolf clans. "By the blood of the Black Gold Royal House, by the seal of the Silver Moon Rose, I swear to the White Skeleton clan, if this journey breaks the old covenant, the White Skeleton clan shall enjoy equal dignity and protection alongside all wolf clans. This oath is sworn upon the barren bone mountains. Should it be broken, the blood oath shall return to haunt the breaker, doubled." The White Bone woman looked at his palm and remained silent for a moment. Then she placed her own palm over his. "Bella," she said. "My name is Bella. I am the current chieftain of the White Bone clan. Remember my name, Wolf King, because if you break this oath, I want you to know, at least before you die, who it was you betrayed." An hour later, we followed 2 White Bone warriors onto the animal trail. The path lay hidden at the bottom of a secluded gorge, its cliff walls on either side densely covered with dwarf pines. Their intertwined canopies formed a natural canopy, blocking any view from above. The ground was hard permafrost and gravel, much easier to walk on than the snowy ridges. But this path did not wind upward. It ran straight north, growing colder and darker with every step. Kalian walked in the middle of the group. He leaned his sword scabbard against the ground like a walking stick, leaving a deep hole in the permafrost with every step. He had not shifted into beast form again. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. The backlash from the blood oath had become so severe that he needed the scabbard's support just to stand. The black veins around his eye sockets had spread from his jawline down to his neck. His collar hid some of them, but not all of it. His breathing had changed as well, shifting from steady to slow and labored. as if every breath had to pass through an ever-narrowing passage. But he did not stop, nor did he let either Leonora or me help him. Leonora walked at the rear. Ever since Bella mentioned how her grandfather had led the burning of the White Skeleton clan's last medicinal field, she had remained silent. It wasn't the calm silence of before, but a heavier kind, as if something were pressing down on her chest. Her eyes kept sweeping over the dwarf pines on the cliffs on either side, trees that were ancient, with twisted trunks and bark covered in old scars. Perhaps she was thinking that 60 years ago, her grandfather's army had hunted down a group of unarmed women and children in a valley, just like this. Perhaps she was thinking that it was during a winter, following that event, that her mother discovered the crimes of her husband's family, and chose to steal the intelligence and hand it over to the late king. Perhaps she was simply thinking that throughout these mountains, deaths she should never have borne, yet now carried on her shoulders, lay buried everywhere. As dusk approached, we stopped to rest in a sheltered rock alcove beside the animal trail. 2 white bone warriors built a small fire at the entrance to the alcove and shared a few pieces of dried meat, hard as stone, and a small bag of melted snow water. Kalian sat down against the rock wall and closed his eyes for a moment. In the firelight, his face looked even worse than it had during the day. His lips were completely drained of color, an unnatural bluish. Gray hue had settled on his forehead, and his breathing was slow and shallow, as if a stone growing heavier by the moment were lodged in his chest. Leonora sat across from him, turning the moonstone over and over in her hand. The bird motif flickered in the firelight, like a real little bird flapping its wings. "Do you know that stone belongs to the White Skeleton clan?" Kalian spoke suddenly, his eyes still closed. "No." Leonora's fingers paused. "It was a keepsake my mother left me. She said it was the only thing she brought with her when she married into the Silver Wolf clan. I thought it was a token from that small tribe in the north. Now that I think about it, my mother probably got it from my grandfather. As for how my grandfather came by it," she didn't finish. "The blood on your grandfather's hands is far more than you can imagine." Kalian opened his eyes and looked at Leonora through the firelight. "Your mother stealing intelligence for the late king, you being taken at age 10 to identify the location of the secret outpost, you living for over 20 years in the prison of a political marriage. These things aren't because you have bad luck. It's because your grandfather never regarded you as his granddaughter from the very beginning. You were a pawn. He intended to marry you off to royalty. Once you bore a prince with the Silver Wolf bloodline, he could use that child to replace me and secure the Silver Wolf clan's complete control over the throne. Your brother's birth merely gave him another, more convenient pawn. Without him, you would have been forced to marry the next Wolf King, whomever that might be." Leonora's fingers clenched the moonstone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Flames danced in her pupils. "I know." Her voice was soft as snow falling on snow. "But I have no choice. I've lived in Silverwolf Castle for over 20 years, and no one has ever asked me what I want. Everyone's first reaction upon seeing me is, she is the most perfect woman in the Silverwolf family. Perfect, that word has weighed on my shoulders for over 20 years. Everything I've ever done has been to live up to it. So I pretended not to see my grandfather's sins, pretended not to remember what my mother said before she died, pretended not to care that you never once looked at me properly, because I was afraid that once I tore away the pretense, I would have nothing left." A dry twig in the fire suddenly snapped, making a sharp crackling sound. Sparks flew up, dancing briefly in the narrow rock alcove before vanishing into the dimness. "But you have something now." Kieran's voice deepened, no longer carrying the cold hardness of a wolf king, nor the tenderness of a brother toward a sister, but rather a more equal human, to human understanding. "You saved her life at the mouth of Wind River Valley. You didn't cry or scream while you stitched her wounds. You returned the moonstone to a white bone woman. You didn't even know. Without the label of the Silver Wolf clan, your reasons for acting have become clearer. You no longer want to be anyone's pawn. That alone is enough for you to start anew. Leonora looked at him. Something flashed in her eyes. Then she blinked it away forcefully. She pressed her lips together, tucked the moonstone into her sleeve, and pulled her cloak tighter as she shifted to the other side of the rock wall. "Stop with the sentimentality," she said, her voice regaining some of its usual coldness, though the end of her sentence trembled slightly. "Save your energy for climbing that last mountain." Kalian's mouth twitched slightly, but he didn't reply. He closed his eyes, his hand still resting on the hilt of his sword, his slow, heavy breathing blending into the twilight. By dusk the next day, we finally stood at the foot of Broken Moon Cliff. Broken Moon Cliff was even more awe-inspiring up close than from a distance. The white cliff face rose nearly 1,000 feet vertically from the ground. The rock surface bore no cracks or protrusions to aid in climbing. It was as smooth as polished bone. The canopy of the laurel grove atop the cliff jutted out from the edge, glowing with a cool, almost sacred silvery green sheen beneath the dusky purple evening sky. The scent of laurel blossoms in the air had reached its peak. Not sweet, but bitter and crisp, with a deep, woody undertone. With every breath, it felt as though my lungs were glowing. But there was no path up the cliff here. 2 White Bone Clan warriors led us to a rocky slope less than half a lie from the base of the cliff, then stopped. One of them pointed to an extremely well-hidden crevice at the end of the slope, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. "Go in here. Inside is a natural cave. Walk up about 2,000 steps, and the exit is at the edge of the laurel forest. Our ancestors used this path. They went into the laurel forest to gather herbs. But that was before the Silver Wolf clan sealed off this area. We don't know what conditions are like inside the cave now." The warrior finished speaking, nodded at us, and then the 2 of them turned and headed back. In the twilight, those 2 white figures quickly vanished among the boulders, like 2 wisps of mist scattered by the wind. The 3 of us squeezed through the crevice and entered the cave one after another. Inside, it was pitch black, damp, and chilly, with water droplets constantly falling from the ceiling, striking the ground with a crisp echo. Leonora held the moonstone in her hand as our only light source. Its faint glow barely illuminated the ground about 10 paces ahead. The cave walls were narrow, with stalagmites and stalactites jutting out in every direction, forcing us to squeeze through sideways. Kalian walked in the middle, and I followed closely behind him. He had been using his sword scabbard as a walking stick for the entire day. But now, in the narrow cave, there wasn't even room for a walking stick, so he could only inch forward step by step, bracing himself against the rock wall. His breathing echoed through the cave, amplified many times over heavy and slow, and he would occasionally pause for a long moment on a ledge before taking another step. I reached out to steady him and touched the hand on his back that was braced against the wall. That hand was as cold as the stone in this cave that had never seen sunlight for years. "We're almost at the entrance," he whispered, his voice muffled by the rock walls. "Don't stop." 2,000 steps. On flat ground, 2,000 steps would take no more than 15 minutes. In this pitch-black, narrow cave, those 2,000 steps took nearly half an hour. With every step, my head and shoulders scraped against the rock walls. With every turn, we had to stop to confirm that the path continued ahead. And when we rounded the final bend, a sliver of light suddenly appeared before us. Not sunlight, but a colder, whiter light, like the tangible form of moonlight, slowly pouring down from the ceiling. We emerged from the cave. Before us lay a gently undulating hillside, covered with laurel trees. Hundreds upon hundreds of laurel trees, each several jang tall, their bark a silvery white, as if saturated with moonlight, emitting a faint, ethereal glow in the deepening twilight. The tree crowns were covered with pale golden flowers. The petals were tiny, clustered tightly among the branches, trembling gently in the night breeze. With every gust of wind, as the clusters swayed, a fine layer of luminous powder would scatter, not pollen, but the moon dust, a substance that, according to legend, only the chosen one can see or touch. As I walked through this grove of laurel trees, my pace slowed unconsciously. Beneath each tree lay a slightly raised mound of earth, topped with a small, moss-covered stone marker. The marker bore no name, no date, only a simple symbol, with a crescent moon drawn within it. The graves of the withered chosen ones. For 300 years, the maid of every generation of Wolf King has been buried here. No names, no biographies, only the symbol of the moon goddess carved into these silent stones. Leonora's fingers traced one of the stones, her fingertips scraping away the moss to reveal the slab's true color beneath. It was not the stone's natural hue. It was a pale gold, as if stained by moon dust. "I've read the royal annals," she said softly, as if speaking to the stone, yet also to herself. "There have been 12 wolf kings over the past 300 years, and each held a marking ceremony after finding his chosen one. The time each chosen one lived from the moment of the mark until she withered. The shortest was 3 months, the longest no more than 2 years. Their death records were brief, simply reading the Queen returns to the moon, leaving not even a name. When I read about it in the library at Silverwolf Keep, I thought it was just an ancient tradition. Now that I'm actually standing in this graveyard," she raised her hand, holding the flecks of pale gold moss from her palm up to her eyes. "I've only just realized that every book in that library might have been paid for with riches plundered from this very grove." Kalian did not look at the graves. From the moment he stepped into the laurel grove, his gaze had been fixed in one direction. The deepest part of the grove at the very top of the hillside, where stood a giant tree nearly twice as tall as the other laurels. Its trunk was so thick, it took several people to encircle it. The silvery, white bark was deeper in hue than that of the younger trees, as if it had been refined layer by moonlight for hundreds of years. The canopy spread out to cover nearly half an acre, every branch twisted and knotted like the veins on an old man's hand. And directly in front of the roots, nestled against the cliff face, was a faintly visible cave entrance, exactly as Leonora had described. The first laurel tree, the one planted by the goddess herself. Leonora walked to the cave entrance at the base of the tree, extended her left hand, and drew a line across her palm with her fingernail. Blood welled up anew from an old wound in the center of her palm, dripping onto the stone slab at the cave's entrance. The runes on the slab lit up instantly. Not a dark red, nor the gold that had shone when Kalian activated the temple's seal, but a silver blue of the purest, coldest hue. This silver blue spread outward from the stone slab, climbing up the trunk along the tree's roots, rising higher and higher. The entire giant tree lit up from top to bottom, as if activated by an electric current. The stone door at the cave entrance slowly slid open, revealing a stone staircase leading downward. "This is the place." Leonora wiped the blood from her palm, her voice trembling slightly. Whether from pain or from having finally reached this point, I couldn't tell. "The Silverwolf bloodline can open this gate, but it cannot break the barrier below. That barrier was set by the goddess herself. Only those bearing her mark may pass." She turned to look at me. "It's up to you. From here." I walked toward the cave entrance and stood on the top step looking down. The cave wasn't pitch black. Instead, it was filled with a soft silvery glow. The light seeped from the stone patterns on the walls, as if the rock itself were breathing. The staircase was long, stretching downwards, with no end in sight. The scent of laurel flowers in the air had become almost tangible. With every breath, it felt as though I were drawing petals directly into my lungs. The back of my neck felt scorching hot. The birthmark was no longer a passive patch of skin, but rather like a heart growing inside my body, beating rhythmically, each pulse sending a wave of heat down my spinal nerves to the tips of my limbs. My vision must be constantly shifting, for I can see every minute vein in the cave walls, every flickering point of the fine luminous dust suspended in the air, and the faint shimmering silver, blue runes floating in the darkness on either side of the stone steps. I took a deep breath and stepped down onto the first step. After taking just a few steps, a dull thud sounded behind me. I spun around abruptly. Kalian had fallen. He was kneeling on one knee on the stone steps, one hand braced against the ground, the other still clenching the hilt of his sword tightly. His head hung low, his short black hair obscuring his face, and the arch of his hunched back revealed every muscle trembling violently. This wasn't a simple fall. His body was spiraling out of control from within. Those faded dark gold pupils had now turned completely gray, and the black blood vessels around his eyes had spread all the way to his hairline. Kalian! I rushed back a few steps, knelt before him, and cupped his face in both hands. His face was as cold as a corpse's hand. His eyelids trembled, as if it took every ounce of strength just to keep his eyes slightly open. The backlash has reached its limit. Leonora crouched beside him, her fingers once again pressing against the side of his neck. This time, her fingers lingered there for a long time, so long that her lips began to tremble. His heart rate has dropped to less than half of normal. He has at most. She didn't finish the number. Kalian's eyelashes twitched. He opened his eyes, pupils entirely gray, with not a trace of gold remaining, and looked at me. Then he smiled. It was a faint, faint smile, the corners of his mouth barely turning up, but that curve held so much. Pride, reluctance, the stubbornness of someone exhausted to the bone, yet still holding on, and a hint of deep tenderness that only appeared when he looked at me. Go. His voice was hoarse, barely more than a vibration of breath. I'll wait for you here, but you... I'll hold on until you return. He moved my hand away from his face, our fingers intertwined briefly before parting. If I don't make it, then you've won. Go your own way. Whether you're marked or not, do as you choose. Don't let anyone or any prophecy dictate your choice. My tears fell onto the back of his hand. I hadn't realized I was crying. Children raised in the servant camp rarely cried, because crying was useless. But now the tears fell completely uncontrollably, scalding hot, one after another, striking the back of his pale hand. Leonora stood up, guided him to a smaller laurel tree near the cave entrance, and helped him sit securely against the trunk. She tore several strips of cloth from her own cloak and rebandaged the gash from his old wound on his abdomen. Then she turned to look at me, her winter, night eyes shining, especially bright in the silver light of the laurel grove. I'll stay here and watch over him. The barrier below can only be opened by your mark. I can't get in. You'll have to go alone. I nodded, stood up, wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand, and turned to face the stone steps leading underground. The birthmark on the back of my neck was still throbbing strongly, as if telling me, hurry, there's not much time left. I stepped down onto the second step, then the third and the fourth. The glow of the laurel grove overhead was gradually swallowed by the cave walls. All that remained around me was the faint silver light seeping from the stone patterns, and the growing warmth rising from the stone steps beneath my feet. That stone staircase was longer than the 2,000 steps inside the cave, plunging deep into the heart of the mountain. The further I descended, the warmer and more humid the air became. The scent of laurel was replaced by another, more ancient aroma, one that was hard to describe, like earth after rain, like trees of immense age, mixed with a faint, faint whiff of old book pulp. The stone steps finally came to an end. I stood in a vast, underground temple. This sanctuary was entirely different from the one beneath the outer city. The sanctuary beneath the royal city was dilapidated and forgotten, its dome shattered and its runes dimmed. This sanctuary, however, was intact, its dome so high it was impossible to see the top, with only a layer of pale silver mist suspended in the air. The floor was composed of large, interlocking white stone slabs, each covered in dense, ancient script. In the very center of the temple stood a massive circular altar, upon which rested a stone coffin. The stone coffin had no lid. A set of skeletal remains lay quietly within. It was impossible to know how many years those bones had lain there. The bones themselves possessed a peculiar hue, neither white nor withered yellow, but a pale gold, as if moon dust had seeped into every pore of the marrow, causing her to glow even after all these years of death. Her hands were folded across her chest, her fingers adorned with silver rings that had oxidized to a blackish sheen. Her skull was tilted slightly to one side, as if listening for something or waiting for someone to approach her. And directly above the stone coffin, something was suspended, a bead, thumb-sized, entirely silvery, white and opaque, its surface shimmering with a halo of moonlight. It hung in midair without any support, rotating with extreme slowness. With every full rotation, all the runes in the temple flickered once, as if the entire temple were breathing with it at its core. I walked to the stone coffin and looked down at the skeletal remains. A stone slab was pressed beneath her hand bones, engraved with text so fine it was barely larger than a grain of rice. I crouched down, using the light from the runes to make out the characters. It was ancient Wolf Clan script, exactly like the one my mother had carved on the altar, only older and more precise. Not scratched with fingernails, but carved stroke by stroke with some kind of sharp, slender tool. I am the first true chosen one. My name is Etheline. I was not chosen, I volunteered. He did not want to mark me. He said he could renounce the throne and take me to the north, to places where the laws of the Wolf Clan did not apply. The day he renounced the throne was the moment I swallowed the crystal bead. He did not mark me, and he never will. The goddess withdrew her power. The war was not won, and many of the Wolf Clan died. People in later generations all say that I destroyed my alpha, but they do not know. The moon goddess's contract was never a blessing, it was a trap. The so-called power of the chosen one did not draw from my soul, but from his. Every wolf king who marks a mate is not drawing power from that mate. They are being slowly killed by the contracts. The goddess turned the royal bloodline's vitality into a 300-year sacrifice, in exchange for the Wolf Clan's victory in the battle of the lunar eclipse. Only by ensuring the royal bloodline grows weaker with each marking can she guarantee no one becomes powerful enough to threaten her divine authority. And the only way to break this trap is to mix my blood with yours and pour it over the crystal orb. But think carefully. Once the contract is broken, the royal family's silver moon power will vanish. The royals will revert to ordinary wolves. The Silver Wolf Clan will seize the opportunity, and the Wolf Kingdom may fall apart. This is the price of breaking the contract. My descendant, whoever you are, no matter how many generations have passed, you stand before me now. Do not hate him. The inscription on the stone slab ended here. The stroke of the final character remained unfinished, a long trailing mark extending from the end of the character to the edge of the slab, as if the carving had been interrupted midway, or as if, after completing the final sentence, the hand had never lifted again. I crouched by the stone coffin, my mind buzzing. The birthmark on the back of my neck had ceased to feel warm. The moment I entered this sanctuary, it had grown cold, a crisp chill as though pierced directly by moonlight. That chill spread down my spine, permeating my entire body, making me feel as if I were submerged in a pool of icy moonlight. Yet my mind was clearer than ever. I understood everything. For 300 years, 12 generations of wolf kings, 12 withered chosen ones, Everyone believed the goddess bestowed power, that the sacrifices gave their lives for the sake of the entire clan. But the truth was the opposite. It was the goddess who was draining the royal bloodline's vitality. Every wolf king who marked a mate believed he was gaining power, when in reality he was being devoured by the contract. Their mates withered and died, not as sacrifices, but killed by the contract's side effects. And as the royal bloodline continued to weaken over 300 years, each generation grew weaker than the last carrion's father died of silver marrow poison. But even without that cup of poisoned wine, he might not have lived much longer. The princes who never became wolf kings either died in infancy, were frail, or failed to awaken their powers. The royal line was in decline, and everyone believed it was due to the bloodline being too pure. When in reality, every generation of wolf kings was being drained of their very essence within the contract's prison, and the Silver Wolf clan never truly desired a chosen one. They sealed off Broken Moon Cliff, established forbidden zones, and killed anyone who might possess the bloodline bearing the goddess's mark, ostensibly to weaken the royal family. But in reality, they were also waiting for the royal line to die out naturally. No coup was needed, no usurpation. All that was required was patience, waiting for the royal bloodline to be completely extinguished by the contract's drain, at which point the throne would naturally fall into the hands of the Silver Wolf clan. That is why Elder Fiend hunted down my mother 16 years ago. Not because she rebelled, but because she was carrying a child with both Silver Wolf and royal blood. A half-blood. If this child were to break the contract upon reaching adulthood, the royal family might not only survive but could even grow stronger through the fusion of Silver Wolf blood. And the Silver Wolf clan's plan, painstakingly crafted over 60 years to wait for the royal family's self-destruction, would come to naught. This is the whole truth behind the prophecy. Either true love or withered bones. This prophecy sounds like a choice between two outcomes. But true love refers to the choice made by the first chosen one. Etheline chose to swallow the crystal orb, preventing the mark from being completed and severing the contract. She did not choose to sacrifice herself, but rather to sacrifice the victory of the entire wolf clan in exchange for her alpha's life. And bone refers to the fate of the 11 chosen ones who came after her, killed by the contract, reduced to nameless gravestones beneath the laurel trees. Now I stand here, the first woman in 300 years to set foot in this sanctuary alive. The bloodline of the first chosen one still flows through me, even after more than a dozen generations. And her choice, that choice deemed a betrayal by all subsequent generations of the wolf clan, has waited 300 years, waiting only for someone to make it once more. I reached my hand into the stone coffin and gently touched the hand bone of those pale golden remains. The bones were slightly warm, not cold, as if the power within this sanctuary had forever sealed the final warmth of life within them. When my fingertips brushed the silver ring on her ring finger, the runes on the ring suddenly glowed. The inscriptions on all 4 walls of the sanctuary began to spin simultaneously, and the crystal orb at the center of the altar emitted an extremely low, deep hum. Like the first heartbeat, my hand began to bleed. It wasn't a cut. Right in the center of my palm, the skin had split open on its own, and bright red blood gushed from the fissure, dropping one by one onto the stone slab at the edge of the sarcophagus. It mingled with the blood of the first chosen one. Her blood had long since dried up 300 years ago. But those pale golden bones still held the last wisp of her life essence, preserved before her silver marrow was drained. As my blood fell upon the skeletal remains, the pale golden glow intensified instantly, and the entire skeleton lit up, like a golden lantern being lit, and blood was still dripping from the palm of my hand. The blood flowed down the edge of the stone coffin, spreading across the floor, following the grooves of the ancient characters carved into the stone slabs, radiating outward from the center of the altar. Wherever the blood flowed, Every ancient character was relit, not with the faint silvery, blue hue of before, but with the same vivid red as the blood gushing from the gash in my palm. The entire temple shifted from silvery, blue to red, then from red to a blazing gold, like the sunrise illuminating the highest snow-capped peaks. In that instant, the birthmark on the back of my neck suddenly emitted a sound like shattering glass. Not the sound of bone shattering, but of something far smaller and deeper snapping. Intense pain exploded along my spine, shooting from the back of my neck straight to my brain, then vanishing in an instant, replaced by a sensation I had never experienced before. Wholeness. It was as if someone had pressed a missing piece of a puzzle, one I hadn't even known was missing, into my body, fitting it perfectly. The crystal bead stopped spinning. It drifted slowly from the air, landing in the palm of my blood-soaked hand. It felt cool and smooth, weightless. The light and shadow within the bead no longer shifted. Instead, they had solidified into two forms, a laurel flower and a drop of blood. Think carefully. A voice echoed in my mind. It wasn't something I heard through my ears. It resonated directly within my consciousness, as if the skeletal remains in the stone coffin were speaking. Yet the voice was incredibly young, incredibly gentle, carrying the accent and sorrow of 300 years ago. Once the contract is broken, the silver moon power of the royal line will dissipate. Your Alpha, the man out there bleeding for you, will lose the power he relies on to fight. The Silver Wolf clan will swoop down like vultures and tear you both to pieces. You can choose not to break the contract. Go up there and mark him, granting him the full power of the goddess. He will become the most powerful king the Wolf clan has ever known. But the price is just like the 11 Wolf kings before him. His life force will be drained by this crystal orb I swallowed long ago. He will be powerful for a time, then wither and die. I clutched the crystal orb, my palm still bleeding. Blood dripped through my fingers onto the stone slab, mingling with the runes on the ground and sizzling. What if I don't mark him, don't break the contract, and just turn back the way we came? Then the contract will continue to run its course. He won't die, but the royal bloodline will continue to weaken. He will become the last generation of wolf kings. After him, the royal line will no longer possess the strength to maintain its rule. The Silver Wolf clan will seize the throne, and everyone connected to the royal line, including you, will be purged. This is not a better path. I look down at the laurel flower and the drop of blood within the crystal bead. Flower and blood, blessing and curse. They have coexisted within this tiny bead for 300 years, never parted. Will he hate me? I murmured, unsure if I was asking Ethel or myself. If I break the contract, if the Wolf clan loses the goddess's power because of me, will he, as the Wolf King, hate me? No, the young gentle voice replied, because he too once thought of running away. I raised the back of my hand to wipe the tears and blood from my face, cradled the crystal bead in both hands, and stood up. Elder Fien did not order a retreat. He merely raised a hand, signaling the front ranks of Silver Wolf warriors to hold their ground. Bathed in the silvery gold light, the warriors in their silver, white armor halted their advance, but did not retreat. They were waiting for their leader to make a decision, waiting for this unprecedented silvery, gold light to reveal a weakness, waiting for the three utterly exhausted figures across from them to collapse first. And they were right. The light in my palm lasted only a little over 40 breaths. It wasn't a lack of power. It was that my body hadn't yet learned how to sustain the output. The power of the twin veins was like a newly dug well. The water source was abundant, but the tools for drawing it were too primitive. The silvery golden light shifted from blazing brightness to a flickering glow, then abruptly retreated into the stone, leaving only a faint wispy halo, as delicate as the tail of a firefly. My knees buckled and Kalian reached out from my side to support my elbow. His hand was still ice cold, but his grip was steady, a vast improvement from just moments ago when I could barely stand. It's a miracle you were able to release such a powerful light the first time, he whispered, his lips barely moving, his voice barely audible to my ear. Don't push yourself. What you need right now isn't to fight. It's to survive and then slowly learn how to use this power. Elder Fiend seized that very moment. Withdraw the light. His voice cut through the night wind with a calmness that sent a chill down my spine. No matter how unique the power of the twin veins is, it requires time to grow. And what you lack most is that time. Here on Broken Moon Cliff today, you have no chance of victory. Kalian has lost his royal power. Leonora has severed ties with her family and cut herself off from their protection. And that bastard, she can't even control her own power yet. The three of you, a worthless king, a traitoress, and a half-finished product. Even if I didn't lift a finger, your chances of walking back to the royal city alive from these barren bone mountains wouldn't even reach 10%. He was right. That was the cruelest part. Every word he spoke was the truth. Kalian would need at least a few days to recover before he could fight again. Leonora's fresh wound on her left arm was still oozing blood, and her combat effectiveness had been diminished by the ritual of severing ties with her family. As for me, I possessed the power of the twin veins, yet I had no idea how to summon it again within the next breath. 30 silver wolf warriors stood less than 50 paces away, their spearheads glinting with a cold, icy light in the moonlight. At Elder Fiend's command, the three of us would be impaled simultaneously, but he did not give the order, for behind him, in the direction of the cave entrance at the base of the laurel grove, another kind of light suddenly flared. Not silvery, gold, not silvery, blue, nor the orange, red of torches. Instead, it was a sea of white specks scattered like fireflies across the hillside. Those points of light flickered in the night, moving swiftly toward the laurel grove, along the animal trail we had come up. Leonora's nostrils flared slightly. Then her eyes lit up, not with the glow of restored combat power, but with the light of someone who had discovered something they had never truly believed in. The White Skeleton Clan. Bella led the way. She wasn't holding a spear, but a burning pine resin torch. Behind her were at least 40 or 50 members of the White Bone Clan. Men and women, old and young, each holding the same kind of torch. The light they emitted wasn't orange, red but a bluish white because the resin was mixed with moonstone powder. The points of light merged into a single expanse, resembling a river of stars awakened against the pitch black night sky of the Bone Mountains. Behind them were even more people. I recognized some of the faces. They were not of the White Bone Clan, but small tribes of free werewolves from around the Grey Thorn Woods, hunters from the foothills, and exiles driven out by the Silver Wolf Clan. There was a tall woman shouldering a wood-chopping axe, a one-armed old hunter clutching a homemade bow and arrow, and a boy who looked to be no more than 15, holding a sharpened wooden stick with fish scales still clinging to its tip. These were not an army. They had no armor, no standard-issue weapons, no tactical training. They were the people of the Bone Mountains, oppressed by the Silver Wolf Clan for 60 years. Their faces were rough and chapped by the mountain winds, their clothes covered in patches and old bloodstains. Yet they stood behind the White Bone Clan on the rocky slope beneath the lower reaches of the Laurel Grove, and not a single one turned to leave. Bella strode out into the clearing between us and the Silver Wolf warriors. She did not draw her weapon. She simply stood there, arms crossed over her chest, a resin torch burning with a white-blue flame at her side. Elder Fane, her voice was hoarse and rough, yet every word carried clearly to every corner of the Laurel Grove. 60 years ago, your father led his troops to burn my valley, kill my grandfather, and take my aunt as a slave. 40 years ago, you yourself led your troops into the mountains, burned our medicinal fields, and let over 100 of our people starve and freeze to death. Every time you come to the bone-dry mountains, your excuse is always the same: suppressing a rebellion. But the White Skeleton clan has never rebelled. We simply live here. She raised her hand and pointed at the Silver Wolf warriors behind Elder Fiend. Today you brought 30 men to capture 3 people who are already battered and bruised. You'll probably add another entry to the Hall of Honor at Silverwolf Fortress: suppression of the rebel clan. But let me tell you, the rebels you're suppressing this time aren't just 3. It's everyone standing opposite me. It's every free werewolf who over the past 60 years has been killed by you, driven out by you, and forced into the deep mountains to wait for death. No sooner had her words fallen than a low murmur of agreement rose from the crowd behind her. It was not a roar, nor a war song, but a resonance welling up simultaneously from the depths of dozens of chests, a resonance that had been suppressed for too many years and had finally found an outlet. The tall woman carrying the wood, chopping axe slammed the handle into the ground, driving a deep pit into the frozen earth. The one-armed old hunter drew his bowstring taut, aiming at the forehead of the Silver Wolf warrior at the very front. Elder Fane's face froze for an instant, an extremely brief moment, but long enough for everyone to see. Then he smiled. It was a faint smile, like that of a chess player seeing a piece appear on the board that was unexpected yet still within his control. A band of stragglers. He waved his hand, signaling the Silver Wolf warriors behind him to close ranks. I did not come here tonight to slaughter. I will take only 3 people. Hand over Leonora, Kieran, and the 2 Veins hybrid, and I guarantee your Whitebone clan can leave safely tonight. I won't hand them over, Bella said, her voice as calm as if she were stating a fact that had already occurred. Then you intend to fight my men with your old, weak, and infirm? Fane's voice finally betrayed a hint of impatience. Chieftain Bella, you're a smart woman. You weren't even born 40 years ago, but your aunt should have told you that the White Bones didn't last even an hour against the Silver Wolf army. She knows. We all remember. Leonora stepped forward from behind Bella. The wound on her left arm had stopped bleeding. Not because it had healed, but because an elderly woman from the White Skull clan had covered it with a herbal ointment. Her voice had regained its usual calm. But this time that calm held no restraint, only strength. But you've forgotten to account for one thing. The group before you, it's not just the White Skull clan. There are also the outcasts banished by the Silver Wolf clan, exiled hunters, half-breed werewolves, and survivors of small tribes. You cannot kill them all. 60 years ago, you thought you had wiped out the free wolves, but they survived. 40 years ago, you thought burning the medicinal fields would destroy the White Bones, but they survived. Every crime committed by the Silver Wolf clan has only made them stand here with greater resolve. You might say one generation isn't enough. Perhaps tonight, we truly cannot defeat your 30 elite warriors. But if you start a battle here, the people you kill will become a legacy of hatred, passed down through all the tribes. That is something you will never be able to suppress. Elder Fane looked at her. No, he glared at her. In those eyes, the same winter, night hue as Leonora's, an emotion deeper than anger finally emerged. It wasn't hesitation. He was a man who never hesitated on the battlefield. It was a colder, more precise judgment. A warrior from the Silver Wolf clan suddenly ran up from the rear of the ranks and whispered a few words into Elder Fiend's ear. Fiend's expression shifted for an instant in the torchlight, an extremely brief moment, but Leonora saw it and Bella saw it too. What the warrior had said was this: an urgent message carried by a messenger hawk from the direction of the royal city. The ripples caused by the destruction of the Blood Oath seal had already traveled from Broken Moon Cliff to the royal city's temple. Both within and without the city, the forces that had lain dormant for 300 years under the suppression of the Old Covenant were stirring. They might not be able to help us now, but the signal that the Silver Wolf clan's own backyard was on fire had already been lit. Elder Fian remained silent for a long time. The laurel grove was so quiet that all that could be heard was the hissing of the burning torches. Then he lowered the hand he had been holding aloft. Retreat. One word. The Silver Wolf warriors behind him froze for a split second, then quickly closed ranks, extinguished half their torches, and began retreating along the path they had come. Elder Fane was the last to turn. As he passed Leonora, his footsteps halted for less than a single breath. "The last words your mother spoke before she died," he murmured, his voice as cold as a chain pulled from an ice cellar, yet with a tremor in the trailing note, so faint it could only be detected by those of the same blood. "Don't let her become me." I granted her wish. "But you will never become her. You are far more ruthless than she was." Leonora did not answer. She simply stood there, her left arm covered in the white bone, clan matron's herbal ointment, her right hand clenched around the moonstone, now completely dulled. Only after Elder Fane's figure had vanished into the darkness beneath the lower reaches of the laurel grove did she take a slow, deep breath. It was a very long breath. Her shoulders trembled as she inhaled, and her whole body swayed slightly as she exhaled. But she still did not cry. The White Bone clan members surged forward, planting torches in the frozen ground at the edge of the laurel grove, forming a white and blue defensive line. The tall woman carrying the wood, chopping axe crouched down to rebandage Leonora's wounds. The one-armed old hunter handed his water skin to Kalian. The boy with the sharpened stick walked curiously up to me and looked up into my eyes. He had probably never seen anyone with silver, gold pupils before. "Your eyes are like a cat's," he said, his voice still childish, but his eyes were bright. I crouched down to meet his gaze. "What's your name?" "Little Stone. Because my dad said I was as hard as a rock when I was born. I didn't even cry." "Is that stone in your hand valuable? How many fish could you trade it for?" I looked down at the moonstone in my palm. It had fallen completely silent, turning into an ordinary white pebble with only the fine engravings on its surface. The birds in flight and the fingerprints left by Leonora's mother still visible. I placed it in the boy's palm. "It'll get you a big fish, but you have to do one thing for me. Keep this stone safe. Come find me when you can read the words on it." The boy nodded vigorously, clutched the stone, and ran back to his mother. Kalian leaned against the first laurel tree. He had nearly drained the one-armed old hunter's water skin. Color had finally returned to his lips, not a crimson hue, but the pale pink of someone who'd been dragged back from the brink of death. His ash-gray eyes gazed quietly in the torchlight, at the chaotic yet warm scene before him. An elderly woman of the White Bone clan was distributing ointment and dried meat. The free werewolf hunters were discussing night watch rotations, and a young border girl was crouched beside Bella, earnestly learning how to apply moonstone powder to the tip of a spear. He watched me approach, then patted the grass beside him. I sat down beside him. My body was finally beginning to feel the full weight of the exhaustion accumulated over these 6 days and nights. Not the kind that crushes you, but more like a pot of boiling water finally removed from the stove, the surface still rippling slightly as the temperature slowly drops. I rested my head against the rough root of a nearby laurel tree and closed my eyes for a moment. Then I opened my eyes and looked at Leonora, not far away. She was sitting on the ground, her left arm wrapped in a bandage smeared with herbal ointment, her right hand holding that small knife as she carved something into a piece of wood. She was carving with great concentration. The flickering firelight played across her face, illuminating it with a stillness and vulnerability greater than at any other moment. "She's carving her mother's name," Kalian said, following my gaze. "I saw her pick up this piece of wood earlier. She plans to place it somewhere her grandfather won't be able to find it." I didn't speak, but simply nodded. The wind still blew through the laurel grove, carrying the tartness of new leaves and the crisp chill of melting snow. The clouds in the night sky above had completely dissipated, revealing a sky full of stars. Those stars crowded the canopy of the sky like countless pairs of eyes that had witnessed everything that had happened tonight. The ancient snow on Broken Moon Cliff was still melting. A thin stream trickled down the cliff face, glistening in the starlight, as if the mountain itself were smiling. In the distance, the white skeleton clan's line of torches burned quietly at the edge of the laurel forest, their pale blue lights forming a gentle arc. Beyond that arc lay the silver wolf army that had just retreated, the royal city brewing a storm and 300 years of blood, debt, and ruins. But within that arc were 3 battered souls, and a pack of free werewolves who no longer had to hide. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know how the situation in the royal city will unfold, whether the Silver Wolf clan will return, if Kalian's body will fully recover, or how long it will take me to truly master the power of the twin veins within me. But in this moment, just this moment, I don't want to worry about tomorrow. That thing you said, Kalian spoke suddenly, his voice soft and gentle in the night breeze. In the temple, I protected you, not because of the prophecy, not because of your status as the chosen one, but simply because you are you, the kind of person I'd fight to the death to protect. He turned to look at me, and for the first time, his ash-gray eyes held no trace of repression, hesitation, or restraint. Those words will never change for the rest of my life. My hand moved from the grass and rested on the back of his hand. This time, his hand wasn't cold. It was warm, like a stone that had been warmed by the sun. He turned his hand over, his fingers slipping through mine, and clasped them. The last laurel blossom in the grove fell from the highest branch, landing precisely on the back of our clasped hands. The petals were silvery white, with faint golden edges glimmering in the starlight. It was no longer the mark of any god, nor the symbol of any curse. It was simply a flower, like any ordinary flower, one that would fall and bloom again. And the prophecy the moon goddess had written over the course of 300 years, whether of true love or of bleached bones, finally fulfilled its purpose completely on this night. The bleached bones were buried in the 11 generations of nameless tombstones, beneath the tree while true love remained upon the tree. It was the servant who had once spilled the wine, who chose this himself.